Chapter 2008. But because they couldn't find the corpse, these golden silk-armored centipedes became somewhat agitated, and some even flew into a rage. They searched for a long time in the vicinity, and even passed by Xiao Hua and the others several times. Then, they roared a few times at one of the golden silk-armored centipedes. Like monkeys scattering when the tree falls, the golden silk-armored centipede that was reprimanded also hung its head dejectedly and flew at the very back. But when the last golden silk-armored centipede flew past Qin Yi, it suddenly stopped and looked in the direction where Qin Yi's figure was hiding. Its nose twitched as if it had discovered something. Moreover, it hesitantly moved towards Qin Yi bit by bit. As the golden silk-armored centipede got closer and closer, this spiritual beast became more and more excited. In the end, it actually started to squeak loudly. The other golden silk-armored centipedes that had already left a long time ago were also attracted by this golden silk-armored centipede. They stopped and a few even flew back. Go, Zhu Qinghe growled. The four of them simultaneously appeared not far from the golden silk-armored centipede and flew towards a direction at an extremely fast speed. Behind them, Xiaohua didn't seem to be fast, but in reality, he didn't fall behind by much and flew up as well. Squeak, squeak, the golden silk-armored centipedes were stunned for a moment. Then, they all flew up and chased after Qin Yi and the others. 3 days later, at the intersection of 3 mountain ranges, there was a place where the vegetation was slightly lush. It was abnormally quiet. Not only were there no sounds of birds or insects, there wasn't even the sound of the wind. The low shrubs were like black trees, pitch black like iron. The pitch black weeds were in the shape of 3 leaves, slanting towards the sky, giving off a heavy feeling. The bottom of this valley was filled with black fog. The black fog was also like pitch black mountain rocks. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't necessarily be able to see it. The top of the valley faced this side of the sky. But above the sky, there were layers of black clouds, like the clouds before a thunderstorm. However, these cumulus clouds were not as translucent as thunderclouds. Instead, they were pitch black. If one were to look closely, they would look like ferocious ghost faces. At a low altitude to the south, Zhu Qinghe and the other 3 suddenly appeared. As they struggled to fly in this direction, they looked back from time to time. When they were a few miles away, the 4 of them suddenly plummeted. Qin Yi and the other 2 were shocked, but Zhu Qinghe's face was filled with joy. He shouted, "Fellow Taoists, we are close to that place. Our Dharma power will be confined. Let's go down now. When we reach this place, neither the golden silk armor centipede nor Mo Zhao will dare to come here." And here? Qin Yi was slightly stunned. She regained her balance and asked curiously, "How did fellow Taoist Zhu find this place?" "Hee, this is all fate." Zhu Qinghe smiled but did not answer. The 4 of them landed on the mountain path, looking very embarrassed. Xie Zhiqian still did not forget to look back. He frowned and said, "Xiaohua, I'm afraid he can't escape from the golden silk armor centipede. I've already said that his cultivation base is too shallow," Zhu Qinghe said coldly. "If he comes here, he'll only be a burden. He might even lose his life," Zhu Qinghe said coldly. But when he looked up, he was dumbfounded. In the distance, Xiaohua was slowly flying over. Although he looked like a baby learning to walk, he still flew over to them. Damn it, this guy is simply a cockroach, an ant that can't be dragged down. Chang Yefeng shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. "Senior, wait for me." Xiaohua was out of breath and raised his hand with a pale face. Then his whole body swayed, and his expression was stunned. Then he fell from the low altitude like a stone. "Haha." Qin Yi covered her mouth and laughed. "I forgot to remind him that his cultivation is shallow. He fell earlier than us." Then, the 4 of them did not say anything more. They sat cross-legged, took out spiritual pills from their storage bags, and took them to recover their magic power and physical strength. In less than 5 minutes, Xiaohua also arrived. Seeing the 4 of them meditating, he did not dare to disturb them. He sat a little farther away and took some spiritual pills himself. After another incense stick of time, Zhu Qinghe stood up first and looked around. "Fellow Zhu, how long until we reach that place?" Chen Yi asked behind him. Zhu Qinghe pointed to the front and said, "It's about 2 hours from here. Last time I was near here. This mountain should be the right place." Then, Zhu Qinghe looked at Chen Yi and said in surprise, "Villa Master Chen, I'm a little confused. Your invisibility spiritual talisman. How could it be seen through by the golden silk armor centipede?" Chen Yi also shook her head. "To tell you the truth, I've been thinking about it for the past 3 days. We have been using our magic skills continuously. By right, we should have gotten rid of the golden silk armor centipede long ago. But every time, they seem to be able to find us accurately. It should be my position. I really don't understand." At this time, Xie Zhiqian and Chang Yefeng also stood up. After hearing Chen Yi's words, Chang Yefeng looked at Chen Yi thoughtfully for a while. Then he said, "I've been thinking about this for a long time. Fellow cultivator Chen, I'm afraid you don't know the way in the mountain." "Why do you say that? Could it be that you found something?" Chen Yi was even more curious. Chang Yefeng said with a smile, "I'm not sure. But since Villa Master Chen asked, I'll tell you." Chen Yi was unhappy and was about to refute him. Zhu Qinghe said with a smile, "Fellow cultivator Chang, if you know something, you'd better tell me earlier." "Well, Villa Master Chen has lived in the Burial Flower Villa for a long time and has always been friends with spiritual herbs and spiritual flowers. You must have the fragrance of flowers and plants." Chang Yefeng said with a smile. "Oh, you're right." Chen Yi slapped her forehead. Although there was regret on her face, there was no regret in her eyes. Instead, she said with some pride, "I neglected this matter. Although I've used a secret method, I can't completely remove the fragrance of spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs. I don't know if it will affect our plan." "Fellow cultivator Chang, you're right." Zhu Qinghe nodded and said, "But there are no golden armor centipedes in front of us, so it won't affect our plan." At this time, Xiaohua also stood up and stood quietly behind them. Chang Yefeng said with a smile, "Fellow cultivator Zhu, when Mo Bao appeared, we ran away in a hurry, but we couldn't find you. We even couldn't find you outside the Mo Bao Black Forest. We were very worried. Who knew that you could come here safely? It really made us happy." Zhu Qinghe heard Chang Yefeng ask this question again. How could he not know what Chang Yefeng was thinking? He said mysteriously, "Guess where I went?" Chen Yi was stunned. She looked at Chang Yefeng and Xie Zhiqian and asked Zhu Qinghe, I'm still in the Mo Bao Black Forest." Zhu Qinghe said with a smile, "But I can't tell you where I went." Chen Yi and the others looked a little unnatural. But Zhu Qinghe waved his hand, and a row of 3 intact Mo Bao corpses appeared in his storage bag. He said with a smile, "I've gained something. Of course, I won't forget it. These are for you." "Ah?" Chen Yi was pleasantly surprised. She waved her hand and put the corpses into her storage bag. She said, "It seems that fellow cultivator Zhu has gained a lot. Then I won't stand on ceremony." Zhu Qinghe smiled and didn't say much. Chang Yefeng and Xie Zhiqian were also very happy. They had already put aside their questions. After all, this was Zhu Qinghe's privacy. As long as it didn't affect their plan, they were too lazy to ask more questions. Xiaohua frowned. He knew that it was not easy to get these Mo Bao corpses. He couldn't help but murmur to himself, "Damn it, is it possible that Zhu Qinghe used a secret method similar to the sky-stealing sun-swapping to hide his cultivation? Is he more powerful than I thought?" However, Zhu Qinghe was so powerful that Xiaohua didn't dare to say anything. His goal was the heavenly ingrass. He didn't care about sword spirits, sword cultivators, or sword immortals. "Let's go." Zhu Qinghe waved his hand with a smile. "There are Li Xiubai's 9 sword spirits and immortal bright swords flying sword in front of us. If I'm not wrong, we will gain a lot here. These Mo Bao corpses are nothing." "Great." Chen Yi and the other 2 clapped their hands and followed Zhu Qinghe along the mountain path, ignoring Xiaohua. Xiaohua didn't say anything. He lowered his head and followed behind them. Although their magic power was restricted, they could still use their true yuan. Zhu Qinghe and the others were all gold core experts. It was easy for them to walk on the mountain path. Sure enough, after 2 hours, the mountain slowed down. The 5 of them arrived at the halfway point where the 3 mountain ranges intersected. Zhu Qinghe pointed at the thick black fog at the bottom of the valley and said with a smile, "It's here." Chang Yefeng and the others were puzzled when they saw the black fog. He asked curiously, "Here, our divine sense and magic power are restricted. We gold core cultivators are no different from ordinary people. Even if Li Xiubai and Immortal Brightsword are nascent soul seniors, how can they use their divine sense under such circumstances? How can they push their flying swords to the extreme? How can they fight well? This is what I said that day." Zhu Qinghe said with a smile, "I've always thought so. Their duel must be in a place where they can use their flying sword divine sense. However, this place has long been searched by the seniors, but they couldn't find any traces. It wasn't until I accidentally came here last time and saw this object in a pitch-black mountain rock that I realized." As he said this, Zhu Qinghe clapped his hands and took out a sword orb with deep cracks. "Sword orb?" Chen Yi blurted out, "Is this the 9 stars transit sword orb?" As she said this, she reached out to take it. However, Zhu Qinghe pulled his hand back with a smile and said, "This item has a peculiar texture and is heavily damaged. The sword spirit inside is also very weak, so I can't determine if it's one of the sword pellets of 9 stars transit. However, after seeing the sword orb, I'm suddenly enlightened. Li Xiubai and Immortal Brightsword swordsmanship has already reached a high level. The 2 of them must have had a duel in the White Sect, so there might not be any results. In order to compete, they chose a place where magic power, divine sense, or flying swords are not allowed. It's a pure duel of swordsmanship. Isn't that the best choice?" Chapter 2009. Sword Dao has no regrets? Chang Yefeng clapped his hands and said, "Didn't Immortal Brightsword say that in his message? Why didn't fellow Zhu tell us about the sword pill earlier?" Chen Yi looked a little embarrassed and asked, "The black fog here is very dangerous. We don't have divine thought and dharma power, so how can we go deep? Besides, everything is just fellow Zhu's guess. We don't know what's inside. How can there be a sword spirit?" Zhu Qinghe laughed and said, "Nothing is absolute in this world. After all, I've never been inside. Fellow Taoists, you're not 3-year-old babies. I'm afraid I don't need to explain this, right? However, since there is a sword pill here, and a very strange one at that. To tell you the truth, in the past 4 years, I went to Huan country and found some sword cultivators. I asked Li Xiubai about the origin of the 9 stars soaring sun sword pill. I already know that the Changbai sect's sword pill is somewhat different from others. This sword pill is the Changbai sect's disciples' sword pill. With such a clue, the answer is naturally obvious, right? This sword pill was deeply imprinted in the huge rock at that time. If I didn't fall, I might not have seen it. Well, the huge rock is over there. Fellow Taoists, you can go and take a look later." Zhu Qinghe was still smiling and said, "Where are the other 8 sword pills? If they're not damaged, in this place where divine thought and dharma power are confined, the possibility of the sword spirits of the 8 sword pills is very high, right? With such a guess, isn't it worth it for us to go in and take a look? Senior Zhu, where's the heavenly Yin grass?" Xiaohua seemed to have gathered his courage and asked. It's the same. This is a place where Yin and Yang converge, and it's full of extreme Yin. If the heavenly Yin grass doesn't grow here, where can it grow? Zhu Qinghe said confidently. Moreover, to be honest, the seniors of Su Yan's sect have been here before, but they didn't go deep. Therefore, I know some of the details. Otherwise, I wouldn't have asked you to prepare those things. The heavenly Yin grass was there in the past, but whether it's there now or not, I can't guarantee with you. Chang Yefeng and Xie Zhiqian thought for a while and nodded slightly. That's right. The guesses of the seniors of our humble sect should be similar to the ones near you. However, they probably didn't expect the 2 seniors of the Way of the Sword to abandon mana and spiritual will. How many people have failed to find this place? Even if they found it, they didn't think too much about it. They just missed the sword spirit and the other treasures for nothing. Xiaohua didn't say much. He only looked at the black fog beneath his feet, deep in thought. This was where Zhen Qing's message was. However, when he saw that the sword pellet was different from his 9 sword pellets, he knew that his sword pellet was definitely not the sword pellet of 9 stars transit the sun. At that moment, he was thinking about how to pick the heavenly ingrass and whether to find that thing that wasn't controlled by consciousness. That's strange. We can't use our divine sense and magic power here. How did Martial Uncle Zhenqing's master know that the object wasn't controlled by divine sense? Xiao Hua was somewhat puzzled. By the way, fellow Zhu, you said that you have something to explain to me. What is it? Qin Yi seemed to be half believing and half doubting. Not only do I have to explain to Villa Head Qin, but also to fellow Chang and fellow Xiao. Zhu Qinghe seemed to know that Qin Yi had asked this question. He clapped his hands and took out 3 jade slips, handing them to the 3 of them. He said with a smile, although this place restricts your divine sense, you can still read the jade slips. I won't say anything. Take a look and you will know. Okay. Chen Yi and the other 2 took the jade slips and immersed their divine senses in them. Zhu Qinghe stared at Chen Yi without blinking. Ah? Chen Yi's expression changed slightly. She raised her head and looked at Zhu Qinghe. Zhu Qinghe said with a smile, these are the jade slips. Villa Head Qin, you don't have to be too surprised. Yes, I know. Chen Yi's face showed a trace of suspicion. She looked at the jade slips again. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the 3 of them withdrew their divine senses. Chang Yefeng said with a bitter smile, it turns out that the jade slips are so difficult. No wonder fellow Zhu came back empty-handed last time. If fellow Zhu didn't come back empty-handed, how could we have come this time? Xie Zhiqian said with a smile. Chen Yi also forced a smile. Fortunately, although the jade slips are difficult, with our previous preparations, we should be able to pass. Okay, let us prepare. After a while, the black mist will change and we will be able to enter. Zhu Qinghe said with a smile. He turned to Xiao Hua and said, Xiao Hua, this place is very dangerous. We can't take care of you. It's not too late for you to change your mind. Xiao Hua took a deep breath and said, thank you, Senior Zhu. Junior has decided to go down. Since you have decided, this old man can't say anything. Zhu Qinghe nodded. Chen Yi glanced at Xiao Hua and didn't say anything. Xiao Hua still stood behind everyone and quietly looked at the black mist. Zhenqing's jade slips didn't explain how to break through the black mist. Perhaps Zhenqing didn't remember, or perhaps Zhenqing's master, Taoist Master Lu Peng, didn't explain. The jade slips only said that there were 4 layers under the black mist. Taoist Master Lu Peng only reached the 4th layer. Seeing that the situation was dangerous, he didn't covet anything and returned to the top of the mountain. As for the sky ingrass, Taoist Master Lu Peng didn't say anything. Or maybe Zhenqing didn't write anything. After the time it took to eat a meal, a light breeze suddenly appeared in the silent mountain valley. Soon after, the wind stopped and gradually became stronger. But the strange thing was that the black mist wasn't affected by the wind at all. Not to mention that it was blown away, it didn't even seem to be blown away. Woo-woo-woo. The wind blew everyone's robes. Chen Yi's beautiful hair fluttered in the wind. Her clothes fluttered in the wind, making her look like a goddess flying in the sky. At this moment, the instant Chen Yi raised her head and stroked her beautiful hair, a thin crack suddenly appeared in the sky that was filled with red clouds. The golden sunlight was like a golden sword that cut through the dense black air of the ink cloud black forest and directly pierced the thick black mist under Xiao Hua's feet. Immediately, the black mist was like melted black snow as it violently rolled. This rolling was like a boiling bubble that quickly complained to the surroundings of the black mist. Shua! Xiao Hua could hear the sound in his ears. The black mist that didn't move at all in the wind was now being pushed by the wind. It was like a pitch-black door was being pushed open. A faintly shining mountain valley appeared in Xiao Hua's vision. Quickly! Zhu Qinghe ordered, fellow Taoists, I've already explained everything in the jade slips. We don't have much time. While the black mist is being pushed away, let's quickly enter. Chapter 2010. As he spoke, he took the lead and rushed down the mountainside along the rugged path. Although immortal Lu Peng briefly described what he saw, Xiao Hua, who rushed down the black fog with the others, was slightly startled when he saw the scene in front of him. Obviously, it was beyond his expectation. Below the black fog was not a common valley, nor was it the same as above the black fog. Rather than a valley, it was better to call it a cave or a space. Xiaohua looked around, only to see specks of light emerging from what looked like stone walls, but also seemed like thin mist. The light illuminated the surroundings. Moreover, extremely pure spiritual qi of heaven and earth lingered in the space. Because the black fog above was pushed away, the spiritual qi of heaven and earth flowed slightly and was about to blow above Xiaohua's head. However, it only flowed for a while and set off a slight wind, then stopped. Obviously, it was suppressed by something above his head. How is it? Fellow Taoists, this is considered a cave paradise, right? Zhu Qinghe looked at the stunned expressions of the crowd and chuckled. When I came here that year, I really wanted to stay and cultivate and never go out again. Sure enough, it is a cave paradise. Such pure spiritual qi of heaven and earth is rare in other places of the Dawn Rain continent, right? Chen Yi came to her senses and murmured, "The spiritual herbs here are growing so vigorously, but unfortunately, they are not very old. If my burial flower manor could move here, I would never want to go out in this lifetime." Fairy Chen, Zhu Qinghe said with a smile, "This place looks peaceful, but it is full of dangers. Once the ink fog is sealed, there will be no chance of survival. Only those who have been exposed to the sunlight for several hours can enter this place. Your burial flower manor has come here, and all the spiritual herbs are flourishing. Everyone is, what's the use of that?" "I see." Qin Yi nodded. "That's what I thought. Since the black fog forest is so dangerous, how could the core area be so safe? This place is only close to the core area, but it is far from the core area." Zhu Qinghe shook his head and said, "I'm afraid that only spirit severing stage seniors can enter the core area." "Fellow Taoist Zhu, I don't understand." Xie Zhiqin coughed and said, "Ink sand corrodes true essence, and it also has the effect of blocking the world energy. Why is there such a rich world energy here? And not be corroded by the ink sand?" I don't know the exact reason. I think it's because Mo Zhao and the Dark Forest Group have blocked all the heaven and earth spiritual energy, so the heaven and earth spiritual energy is gathered here." Zhu Qinghe was a little impatient. He looked at Qin Yi and said, "Manor Lord Qin, you should first see if there are any spiritual herbs that you need. I will go with fellow Taoist Chong to see the place that leads to the lower level." Okay, since she couldn't use her divine sense here, Qin Yi naturally had to check the plants one by one. She agreed and skipped away happily. Xie Zhiqin was not interested in the spirit grass. He also followed Zhu Qinghe and Chang Yefeng to check along the stone wall. It seemed that he was looking for something. Xiaohua understood that this was the first level of the valley. It was separated from the second level by a natural restriction. It required a special method to weaken or break the restriction in order to enter the second level. It was the same for the later levels. But for some reason, Zhen Qing's Jade Slip didn't explain the key points in detail. It only gave a simple introduction. Xiaohua originally thought that the key point was very simple, so Zhen Qing didn't explain it. But now, seeing the serious look on the faces of the Golden Core cultivators, how could Xiaohua not know the importance of this key point? Naturally, Xiaohua also knew that Zhen Qing didn't expect him to come here when he was only in the foundation establishment stage. He also understood that the thing that wasn't controlled by divine sense was probably just an excuse for Zhen Qing. The experience of condensing the Golden Core was the real thing that Zhen Qing used to repay him. After thinking for a while, Xiaohua also went to check the spirit grass. After all, Zhu Qinghe didn't say which level the heavenly yin grass was on. However, he and Qin Yi went in the opposite direction. They started from the other side of the stone wall. The spirit grass here was just as Qin Yi said. Although they were flourishing and some of them were relatively rare, their age wasn't too old. From time to time, senior cultivators with profound cultivation would come here to pick them. Since Qin Yi didn't care, Xiaohua also didn't care. After searching for half a pack of cigarettes, Xiaohua had only found a few young spirit herbs that he didn't recognize and moved them into his space. At this time, Just as Xiaohua straightened up and wanted to move forward, a faint light flashed from the side of a spirit grass seedling in front of him. If Xiaohua's sixth senses weren't far superior to ordinary cultivators, he might not have seen it. What is that? Xiaohua was slightly surprised and his heart trembled. Could it be a spirit beast that looks after the spirit grass? Immediately, Xiaohua became cautious and slowly walked over. However, when Xiaohua walked over, it was only an ordinary spirit grass. How could there be a spirit beast that looked after it? Xiaohua? Did you pick some special spirit grass? Not far ahead, Chenyi unexpectedly walked over from the white mist and asked strangely, "Can you fly here?" Xiaohua didn't answer and looked at Chenyi's feet and asked instead, "This is a natural restriction. Cultivators won't fall down if they walk on it." Chenyi pursed her lips and said with a smile, "If you can fall down, would fellow Taoist Jew still spend so much effort to find the key to go down?" Junior's knowledge is shallow. I've really made Senior laugh. Xiaohua suddenly understood and pointed his finger again, saying, "Junior just saw that there was a brilliance beside this spirit grass and thought it was some rare spirit grass that had a spirit beast looking after it. However, I came to take a look and found it to be very ordinary. I'm afraid Junior's eyes are playing tricks on me." Your eyes must be playing tricks on you." Chenyi raised her eyebrows and said with a nod, "The spirit grass here is very ordinary. It's planted in my burial flower manner. Your heavenly ingrass definitely won't be here. You don't need to look carefully. Junior understands. Junior doesn't need Senior's help. I still want to find a few spirit grass that can be used for foundation establishment," Xiaohua said with a smile. However, without waiting for him to finish, Chenyi waved her hand and said, "I've already looked. These spirit grass are too young and can't be used for anything. You don't need to waste your time." Soon after, she raised her head and looked into the distance. She said, "Let's go. Fellow Taoist Jew must have found the way down by now. We'd better go there as soon as possible. Don't delay. Your cultivation level is the lowest, so you'd better follow us closely." Junior understands. Xiaohua bowed and saluted, then followed Chenyi in the direction Zhu Qinghe had gone. Although Xiaohua left, he was still muttering in his heart. He looked back slightly, but even after he walked far away, he still couldn't see anything unusual. This is a bit strange. Xiaohua didn't think his eyes were playing tricks on him and muttered in his heart. However, right at this moment, he heard Zhu Qinghe's laughter in front of him. As I said, the seniors of my Su Yan school have already been here before. The records in the ancient records are definitely correct. When Chenyi heard this, she turned her head and glanced at Xiaohua. She waved her hand and motioned for Xiaohua to follow her while she quickly walked over. After walking for about 100 feet, Xiaohua saw Zhu Qinghe and the others under a few inexplicable vines with misty spiritual aura lingering around them. It was a thick vine with big bumps on top of each other. There were some 3-inch-long thorns on each of the bumps, which were shining with a strange red brilliance. Sky-piercing vine? When Chenyi saw this thing, she was a little surprised and whispered, "Although this thing is called a vine, it's actually very fierce. It can devour people's essence and blood. It can even turn into a human after a long time. This thing actually still exists in the world?" When Xie Zhiqian and Chang Yefeng heard this, their bodies slightly shrank and they moved further away from the sky-piercing vine. They were afraid that the sky-piercing vine would suddenly attack them. "Fellow Taoists, don't panic," Zhu Qinghe said with a smile. "This thing is still in its infancy. It's still far from being able to hurt people. Villa Headchen is talking about the sky-piercing vine that is hundreds of thousands of years old. That kind of monster is against the natural order. It doesn't exist in the Xiaoyu continent now." Fellow Taoist Jew is right. That's right. Chenyi covered her mouth and laughed. This sky-piercing vine has another advantage. As long as it has something to rely on, it can continue to grow, no matter how high it is. The word sky-piercing comes from this. A trace of gloominess flashed across Chang Yefeng's face. He stood aside coldly, as if he was embarrassed by Chenyi's deliberate teasing. Zhu Qinghe acted as if he didn't see it and said with a smile, "Villa Headchen, Now you know why I asked you to prepare the ice orchid bamboo? I understand. Chen Yi nodded and said, this ice orchid bamboo is condensed by the ice orchid insect, which is the natural enemy of the sky-piercing vine. Wherever the ice orchid insect is, there will be no sky-piercing vine. But Xie Zhiqian asked curiously, these two don't seem to have anything to do with each other. Hee, the ice orchid insect likes fragrant and wood-type spiritual qi the most. Although the sky-piercing vine is not as attractive to the ice orchid insect as the ice orchid bamboo, if the ice orchid insect smells the scent of the sky-piercing vine, it will certainly absorb it. Chen Yi explained with a smile. However, the sky-piercing vine is not as hard as the ice orchid bamboo. Once the ice orchid insect absorbs it, the sky-piercing vine will be corroded, and all the harmful things in the vine will be swallowed by the ice orchid insect. The sky-piercing vine will also die. In addition, even if the ice orchid insect dies, the things in its corpse will still be a threat to the sky-piercing vine, so the ice orchid bamboo is the best way to deal with the sky-piercing vine. As she spoke, Chen Yi smiled and took out an ice orchid bamboo that was more than a foot long from her storage bag and handed it to Xiaohua. Go, put this ice orchid bamboo on the sky-piercing vine. Xiaohua was slightly stunned, but he had to bite the bullet and take the ice orchid bamboo. Xiaohua, be careful. When you put the ice orchid bamboo in, it will definitely release the things in the sky-piercing vine. Don't touch those things. If it wasn't for Xiaohua, it would definitely be Xie Zhiqian who did this. Therefore, Xie Zhiqian kindly reminded Xiaohua. Chapter 2011. Thank you, Senior. Xiaohua smiled bitterly. Holding the bamboo in his hand, he walked to the side of the sky-soaring vine and looked it up and down. His eyes turned slightly, then he waved his hand. It looked very casual, but the angle of insertion was very precise. With a light puff sound, the bamboo was easily inserted into the sky-soaring vine. Not a drop of poison seeped out. But at the same time, Chang Yefeng cried out in alarm and quickly dodged to the side. Xiaohua looked back in shock and saw a peach-red liquid spurting out from the bamboo towards Chang Yefeng, who was standing beside him. Oh, Senior Chang. Xiaohua saw this and his face was full of apology. He hurriedly shouted, Junior made a mistake. Junior didn't expect this bamboo to be hollow. Chen Yi covered her mouth and laughed. This bamboo is not hollow, but when it comes in contact with the juice of the sky-soaring vine, the texture in the center will quickly melt. Buzz. Just when Chang Yefeng was angry and wanted to hit Xiaohua with his hand, he heard a loud roar in the valley. Looking at the sky-soaring vine in front of Xiaohua, it began to gradually tremble, shaking the nearby stone wall. The bamboo that was inserted into the sky-soaring vine began to slowly melt and merge into the wound of the sky-soaring vine. Let's hide aside. Zhu Qinghe didn't understand and hurriedly retreated to the side. The sky-soaring vine began to twist, like a snake's tail being stepped on. The peach-red juice of the sky-soaring vine also spilled out in the air. The sky-soaring vine swayed for a moment, then slowly twitched again and gradually shrank down along the stone wall. When the sky-soaring vine disappeared, revealing a hole the size of several people, Xiaohua immediately understood that Zhu Qinghe and the others were planning to do this. Xiaohua, you go down first. Zhu Qinghe ordered without hesitation. Yes, Junior will go down first. Xiaohua responded, walked to the hole, and poked his head out to take a look. This was the same stone wall as the first floor. There was nothing special about it. Xiaohua sized it up and jumped down. However, just as his figure landed on the precipitous part of the stone wall, he heard a gust of wind. A black shadow flashed past and whipped towards Xiaohua's head from the top. Xiaohua's transcendence energy is completely depleted, but he still has his fists and kicks. He waved his hand, wanting to block the shadow. But when he glanced over, he realized that the black shadow was actually the gigantic sky-reaching vine from before. Numerous sharp thorns were piercing towards him. Moreover, the whooshing sound of the wind indicated that the vines were extremely powerful. Xiaohua waved his hand. Originally, he wanted to take out the Great Wisdom Sword. However, his hand only moved slightly before stopping. His feet moved slightly as he used the ethereal steps. His figure flashed to the left and easily dodged the sky-soaring vine. Pang! The sky-reaching vines hit the stone wall. Dozens of tiny holes appeared on the hard stone wall. It was obviously the work of those thorns. Woo! The sky-reaching vine was actually extremely nimble. Using the counterattack force from the stone wall, it turned horizontally and struck towards Xiaohua's waist. Xiaohua frowned slightly. Without waiting for the vines to reach him, he jumped into the air and somersaulted just in time to dodge the vines. The shiny thorns barely scratched Xiaohua's waist. However, this wasn't the end of it. While Xiaohua's figure was still in the air, a dozen or so vines that were attached to the stone wall shook and swung towards Xiaohua from all directions. Damn it, Xiaohua cursed in his heart. He looked at the hole from the side. Zhu Qinghe and the other three did not appear. Clearly, they were waiting. Forget it. Xiaohua sneered. His figure moved and he used the ethereal steps. It seemed that he did not use his magic power but relied on the strength of his body to escape into the distance. The second floor was somewhat different from the first floor. It seemed that the space was much larger. The natural restriction under Xiaohua's feet made it soft to step on. It was no different from stepping on grass. Following Xiaohua's escape, the sky-reaching vine was like a giant hand baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It chased after him and swayed. After half a cup of tea's time, Xie Zhiqian poked his head out of the hole. Seeing that there was no movement, he shouted, "Manor Lord Qin, wait for a while. Xiaohua has lured the sky-reaching vine away." Zhu Qinghe and the others jumped down. Looking at the nearby tranquility and listening to the sound of collision in the distance, the four of them were calm. "Actually, we should let Xiaohua know the situation," Chang Yefeng said in a low voice. "At least he can be prepared." Zhu Qinghe narrowed his eyes and said, "This place is very dangerous. I have already told him. If he wants to come here, I can't do anything about it. But I only prepared 3 jade slips. With one more, there will be more danger of it being leaked. Could it be that the 3 of you are not afraid that the Changbai sect or the Flame Bamboo Sword sect will come after you?" "Don't say so many useless things," Chen Yi said calmly. "Let's quickly find the way to the 3rd floor. If Xiaohua can come back safely, the sky-reaching grass is on the 3rd floor. Why don't we just let him pick it? Isn't this what he wants?" "Exactly." Zhu Qinghe nodded. He looked around and waved his hand. He quickly walked in a direction. Chen Yi and the others did not hesitate to follow. This time, no one looked in Xiaohua's direction. As for Xiaohua, his figure was fluttering as he fled. Once he was far away, he reckoned that Zhu Qinghe and the others wouldn't be able to see him. With a wave of his hand, the great wisdom heavy sword appeared in his hand. His figure leapt up and casually swung it. With a light schwa sound, the sky-soaring vines were easily cut off by the heavy sword. With a pew sound, the peach-colored liquid sprayed out and filled the sky. Xiaohua was not afraid at all. He had already calculated the angle. His figure flashed and dodged the juice. Then he jumped up again and nimbly cut off several more vines. Woo-woo! Another gust of wind blew. The sky-soaring vines retreated. Although the remaining vines did not retreat, they still swayed in the distance and did not come closer. Xiaohua coldly snorted. He raised his head and took a look. Then, with quick steps, he ran towards a small cave on the stone wall. After waiting for Xiaohua's figure to disappear into the cave, those sky-soaring vines finally slowly retracted back, landing on some unknown stone wall. The sky-soaring vine was not weak. Not only was it fast, but it was also extremely sharp and poisonous. It could even swallow a cultivator's liquid. This was especially true in this place where one's divine sense and dharma power were restricted. Regardless of whether it was Chang Yefeng, Chen Yi, or even Zhu Qinghe, they might not be able to dodge the sky-soaring vine so easily. Unfortunately, the sky-soaring vine met Xiaohua, a strong martial artist. It had to be said that this was a tragedy for the sky-soaring vine and a comedy for Zhu Qinghe and the others. Chapter 2012. I'll rest here for a while first. Xiaohua hid in the cave and laughed coldly. It won't be too late for me to go after you found the path to the 3rd floor. Or perhaps you all can go in first. I'll be a fisherman. But at this moment, Xiao Hua was slightly stunned. How can I use my divine sense in the cave? Of course, the cave wasn't very deep. It was only about 10 feet deep. Xiao Hua was currently sitting in the middle of the cave. His divine sense was naturally probing the inside of the cave. Although his divine sense couldn't extend very far, it was clearly much stronger than when he was in the valley. This is Li Mian stone? Xiao Hua's divine sense landed on the stone wall, and he shockingly discovered that there was actually a piece of refining material inside. Great! Xiao Hua was overjoyed upon seeing this. He didn't care about meditating and cultivating qi. He jumped up from the ground and released his Buddhist sense, examining it bit by bit. After he finished looking, he unconsciously stretched out the stone and said to himself, "Good, this cave isn't long, but there are a lot of refining materials inside. Although they aren't too rare, if I were to search for them in the auction, wouldn't I have to spend a lot of spirit stones? Now I actually have all of them, it's really not bad." Xiao Hua immediately calmed down his angry thoughts. He picked up the Great Wisdom Sword and became a miner, digging out the materials that he could see with his Buddhist sense one by one and storing them into his space. Alas, everything is good here, but unfortunately there's no Qian Mo stone. And this place should be like what Zhucheng has said, it's the place where the spiritual energy of Ink Shadow Black Forest gathers. A lot of materials are formed because of the pressure of ink sand. It can be said that there are a lot of rare materials in the entire mountain range. Xiao Hua thought as he put away all the materials he could get his hands on. He clapped his hands and sat down. But immediately after, Xiao Hua slapped his forehead and laughed. Damn it, this young master is stupid. This cave is probably where those nascent soul and even spirit-severing cultivators come to look for refining materials, right? The materials that I picked were probably left here by those seniors who disdained to use them, right? This is bad. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua was suddenly startled. Since there are so many caves here, then perhaps the passage to the 3rd floor is inside one of the caves. This young master only cares about resting here. If those shameless seniors think that this young master has died and entered the 3rd level without waiting for this young master, then wouldn't this young master's heavenly ingress be lost? Forget it. For Xue Xue's sake, I'll endure it for now. Xiao Hua thought and didn't dare to be negligent. He hurriedly ran out of the cave and returned along the route he had just escaped. Xiao Hua ran for a moment, but he heard a su sound not too far ahead. He could not help but be delighted. Senior Zhu, this kid is here. However, when he finished shouting, the su sound in front of him disappeared again. No one answered him. Is it Senior Zhu? Xiao Hua was slightly taken aback. With a wave of his hand, the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword appeared in his hand. Step by step, he walked forward. However, even when he walked to the front of a cave, he still did not see a single person. Strange, what's wrong with me today? Xiao Hua scratched his head. Why am I always so suspicious? Just when Xiao Hua was bewildered, a slightly thin sky-soaring vine shot out from under Xiao Hua's feet. Like a poisonous snake, it coiled around Xiao Hua. I was wondering. So it's just this thing. Xiao Hua did not even think. With a wave of his hand, he actually chopped the sky-soaring vine into several pieces. Xiao Hua himself also quickly dodged and hid in the cave. The sky-soaring vine seemed to be in pain. It swayed and actually rushed into the cave, wanting to swallow Xiao Hua. It's really something delivered to my doorstep. Xiao Hua was overjoyed. His figure quickly rushed to the entrance of the cave. With a light wave of his hand, he actually cut off the sky-soaring vine that was several feet long. Then, with a wave of his hand, he did not touch the sky-soaring vine's vines and stored them into the space. Within the space, in an extremely distant place, other than the mountain of Mo Zhao's corpse, there was even more than these corpses. Blackwood. These blackwood were all extremely thick and long. Alas, not to mention the sky ingrass. Just these things alone made Xiao Hua's trip to Mo Zhao's Black Forest worthwhile. The sky-soaring vine that had its vines chopped off by Xiaohua one after another was really scared at this time. With a rustling sound, it pulled back its vines and did not dare to show its face again. Xiaohua also casually dug out several pieces of refining materials before leisurely coming out of the cave. "Thank you, Senior. Thank you, Senior." Xiaohua ran to the entrance of the cave from the first floor to the second floor and shouted. Unfortunately, no one responded. Damn it, Xiaohua was somewhat helpless. He looked left and right, then his gaze fell on the ground and smiled. He saw that there were some spiritual herbs on the ground, but at this time, some of them had fallen. It was the traces of someone walking past. Although it was not obvious, Xiaohua could still distinguish it. These gold core cultivators. Xiaohua shook his head. Although they are very old and their cultivation is profound, they have been interacting with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth since they were young. They are associated with divine sense. Suddenly losing these divine abilities, they seem to be no different from ordinary people. Suddenly, Xiaohua thought again. In this place, this young master's strength directly suppressed the four of them. If this young master is angry, won't the four of them lose their lives? Why should this young master be so timid? Just directly subdue them and bring this young master to pick the heavenly Yin grass. Or, let Chen Yi pick it for this young master. Wouldn't that be better? Hehe, unless I kill them all here. Xiaohua immediately put away this baseless thought. Otherwise, if this young master leaves the Inkshao Black Forest, will this young master still be alive? Following the faint traces on the stone wall, Xiaohua really found the front of a cave. However, this cave was obviously different from the other caves Xiaohua had seen before. There was a thick fog in the cave, and he could not see clearly inside. Senior Zhu? Manor Lord Qin? Xiaohua did not dare to release his divine sense, and also did not dare to rashly enter. He could only shout softly. Xiaohua, you are still alive? Xie Zhiqian's voice sounded from the side of the cave. Yes, it is this junior. Xiaohua smiled and cupped his hands. Senior Xie, have you not gone down yet? I am waiting. Xie Zhiqian's figure appeared from the fog with a short sword in his hand. The time is not right. The entrance to the third floor has not appeared yet. You came at the right time. You stay here and guard. I will go in and take a look. Yes. Xiaohua nodded and entered the cave. He stood at the place where Xie Zhiqian was guarding. Not long after, Zhu Qinghe walked out and sized up Xiaohua. He frowned and said, Xiaohua, how did you escape from the sky-soaring vine? How did you find this place? All right, I will let Senior Zhu know. Xiaohua bowed and said, after this junior lured the sky-soaring vine away, I happened to find a cave on the stone wall and quickly hid inside. The cave was very long, and the sky-soaring vine could not penetrate it. This junior waited for a while, but there were no more sky-soaring vines, so I came out. You are quite clever. Zhu Qinghe raised his eyebrows and nodded slightly. There are many similar caves on the stone wall. How did you find them? After Xiaohua explained the reason, Zhu Qinghe frowned again and looked at the ground outside the stone wall. It was as Xiaohua said. Alas, the ancients are right. Pay attention to everything and learn. Zhu Qinghe shook his head and said, this old man calculated and calculated to cover up his tracks, but I never thought that I would make such a big mistake. Fortunately, there are few people here. Otherwise, we would have been discovered. Senior Zhu. Xiaohua's heart moved and said, when this junior was on the first floor, I seemed to have seen some brilliance and I also seemed to have heard some movement, but, what? Zhu Qinghe raised his eyebrows and rushed out. He looked around for a long time, then frowned and asked, are you sure? Of course this junior can't be sure. Otherwise, I would have already told the seniors. Xiaohua shook his head. Well, there is usually no one in the core area of the Ink Cloud Black Forest. Moreover, the cultivators who come here are all nascent soul stage seniors. They won't be so sneaky. Zhu Qinghe nodded and said, the movements you mentioned are probably caused by the sky-climbing vine, right? And this junior thinks so too. Because I was attacked by another vine, this junior had no choice but to hide in the cave again. Xiao Hua smiled apologetically. At this moment, Qin Yi's voice sounded from inside the cave. Fellow Taoist Zhu, there is movement. Come quickly. Xiao Hua, you come too. Zhu Qinghe waved his hand and said, follow me to the 3rd floor. There should be sky-in grass there. You can pick it yourself. Thank you, Senior Zhu. Xiao Hua quickly bowed and carefully followed Zhu Qinghe into the cave. This cave was actually very long. Moreover, there were some natural bends inside. However, fortunately, there were no forks. Zhu Qinghe and Xiao Hua walked for a moment and reached the end of the cave. At the end of the cave was a space of several zhang. At the bottom of the space was a clear spring. The spring was about 1 zhang wide. Around the spring, on the stone walls, there were many spiritual herbs. These spiritual herbs were not pure white and looked like they were carved out of ice and jade. Before Xiao Hua could get close, a chill rushed over him. Xiao Hua couldn't help but shiver. This is a fire spirit pill. Take one. Zhu Qinghe didn't turn around. With a flick of his hand, a green bean-sized pill was thrown to Xiao Hua. Thank you, Senior. Xiao Hua took the pill and hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth and swallowing it. Sure enough, a stream of heat flowed out from his dantian as he swallowed the fire spirit pill. Soon after, it flowed through his limbs and bones, and the chill gradually faded away. How is the reaction of the ice spring? Zhu Qinghe asked in a low voice. There was a slight tremor just now. There was a ripple in the center of the ice spring. However, it only lasted for a moment before it calmed down. Chen Yi said in a low voice. Her gaze swept past Xiao Hua's face. And it's good that there was a tremor. The ancient records say that there are 9 tremors. After 9 tremors, we will have a chance. Zhu Qinghe turned to look at Xie Zhiqian. In a moment, I will have to ask fellow Taoist Xie to make a move. Chapter 2013. Well said. Xie Zhiqian nodded. I've been itching to try for a long time. Hee. Zhu Qinghe laughed and turned his attention back to the ice spring. Why can't I use my divine sense here? Xiao Hua tried to use his Buddhist sense and divine sense, but they couldn't leave his body. It's completely different from the cave just now. Villa Master Qin, these spirit herbs look very rare. Xiao Hua looked at the spirit herbs above the ice spring and couldn't help but whisper. Humph, I also want to pick them. Qin Yi snorted unhappily. Unfortunately, we don't have divine sense or magic power, so we can't use the picking technique. These spirit herbs are born from the ice spring's extreme spiritual energy. If we touch them with our flesh and blood, not only will we be immediately contaminated, we won't be able to use them. If it's serious, we'll immediately turn into spiritual energy and our bodies will also be injured. She glanced at Xiao Hua and teased, how about you go and pick them? Xiao Hua heard and shook his head. Senior doesn't dare to take the risk, how can Junior dare? It's better to be honest. However, Xiao Hua was calculating in his heart how to find a time when the 4 of them weren't paying attention and use his divine sense to take these spirit herbs into his space. After a few breaths, the center of the ice spring began to tremble slightly, as if a needle had pierced it. Ripples spread out in succession and quickly spread in all directions. Xiao Hua saw it clearly and his eyes turned rapidly. This was really strange because there wasn't any movement nearby. Soon after, the trembling became even more intense, each time faster than the previous one. After the 9th time, the entire ice spring suddenly began to boil. One by one, thumb-sized bubbles formed in the middle of the ice spring and quickly spurted out. Waves of extremely cold air rushed into the air and landed on the white sparkling spirit grass on the stone wall. Right now! Hearing Zhu Qinghe's soft reprimand, Xie Zhiqian reached into his bosom and took out a fiery red pill. He raised his head and swallowed it. Then, a trace of dark red appeared on his face. Then, his left hand activated magic power and a spell was formed. Immediately after, Xie Zhiqian pulled his right hand again and untied the storage bag at his waist. With a shake of his hand, a fiery red flame flew out from the storage bag. It was a fist-sized fire bat king. When Xie Zhiqian saw the fire bat king come out, he struck the center of the cold spring with his left hand. Walala! the sound of ice sealing was heard, and a few wisps of white flames appeared above the cold spring. The fire bat king circled around Lung Quan a few times in the air. It squeaked angrily and rushed towards Lung Quan. The fire bat king's squeaking sound wasn't very loud, but in Xiaohua's ears, there was a burst of ringing in his ears. Even his brain felt waves of pain. This pain was extremely similar to the pain he had felt when refining the jade blood pill, but it was much lighter in comparison. Xiaohua only frowned slightly, not caring about it at all. Looking at the many bubbles above the cold spring, under the fire bat king's squeaking sounds, they all popped one after another. Even the dozen or so white spirit herbs on the stone wall began to crack. In the end, they gradually broke apart and fell into the cold spring. Just as the fire bat king was halfway there, at the center of the cold spring, where the bubble had burst, there was another vibration that was 10 times stronger than before. This time, it was even stronger, and it formed a deep concave shape. When the fire bat king rushed into the concave shape, 100 times stronger vibration was generated in the cold spring. Finally, with a bang, the entire cold spring suddenly disappeared. A hole about 10 feet wide appeared in front of Xiaohua and the others. Waves of cold air rushed out from the hole. "Let's go!" Zhu Qinghe growled. He took the lead and jumped into the hole. Chen Yi and the others also followed without hesitation. On the other hand, Xiaohua hesitated slightly. He looked up at the few white spiritual herbs and sighed. He also jumped down, seemingly a little regretful. With a cheese sound, Xiaohua only felt a slight blur in front of his eyes. Before he could see the situation in front of him clearly, his feet slipped, and his whole body suddenly fell down. Ouch! Xiaohua was shocked. He slapped his hand, wanting to use the force to reverse his body and maintain his balance. However, the place where his hand fell was strangely cold and smooth. It was as if there was no force at all. Thus, Xiaohua's whole body curled up and slid down along the smooth surface. At this time, Xiaohua could clearly see that this was a slanted slope. The slope was completely formed from transparent ice. This ice was incomparably hard and smooth. Not only was Xiaohua sliding down the slope, but the 4 people who had entered before were also sliding down. It was just that they had slid down a bit further. Damn it! Xiaohua was slightly stunned. Immortal Lu Peng didn't seem to have mentioned such a difficult place, right? Martial Uncle Zhen Qing didn't write it down? Although the slope was incomparably smooth, it wasn't long. Xiaohua quickly slid down to the bottom of the valley. Zhu Qinghe and the others had already climbed up and hid at the side. Seeing that everyone was in the same sorry state as him, Xiaohua secretly laughed. However, he didn't dare to say anything. He tidied up his Taoist robe and obediently stood at the side. However, Xiaohua's eyes didn't stay idle. They looked around randomly, trying to find the whereabouts of the heavenly ingrass. He saw that this was a narrow slanted valley. It was completely formed by transparent ice. He didn't know how thick the transparent ice was, but he could faintly see the reflection of everyone. In this frozen valley, he didn't see any greenery. Instead, there were some things that were similar to the spiritual herbs above the cold spring. They grew on the steep ice valley. It's easy to come down, but difficult to go up. Xiaohua sighed and looked at the slope that he came down from. In a situation where he didn't have any magic power, going up from here was really strenuous. However, since Zhu Qinghe and the others came prepared, Xiaohua didn't think too much. If they could go up, Xiaohua naturally could too. Wait a moment, let me take a look. At this moment, Zhu Qinghe's face was somewhat dignified. All 4 sides here are the same. It's very difficult to distinguish the direction. According to the sect's ancient records, it's very special. Oh, it's over there, Zhu Qinghe said as he looked around. It was unknown what he saw, but he pointed at an ice wall and said. Xiaohua was curious. He looked for a long time, but he couldn't find any clues. He couldn't help but secretly shake his head. Zhu Qinghe led everyone towards the ice wall with great difficulty. They were really slipping 3 times with each step. They were in an extremely sorry state. The faces of these gold core and foundation establishment cultivators had already been smashed countless times here. Seeing the ice wall in front of them, the strange thing was that although it was clearly a solid ice wall, when they walked in front of it, it was actually just a shadow, a reflection of the ice wall on the other side. Chapter 2014. When Zhu Qinghe walked past the ice wall, Xiaohua was dumbstruck by the scene in front of him. On the other side of the ice wall was another slanted stone wall. However, it was covered in red lava. There was even dark red lava quietly flowing on it. This scene was no different from the Flame Forest Mountains. Looking at the middle of the two stone walls, there was an open area about 10 feet wide. It was flourishing with flowers and lush with spirit herbs. The verdant vegetation formed a green barrier, dividing the fiery red and snow white into two. Heavenly Een grass. Xiaohua looked over and found the heavenly Een grass in the center of the spiritual herbs. He couldn't help but exclaim, "Don't be anxious." Zhu Qinghe said in a low voice, "This is the intersection of yin and yang. Two different kinds of spiritual energy of heaven and earth are mixed here. It is very strange. According to the records of the sect, there is a two-headed spirit snake breeding here." Two-headed spirit snake? Xiaohua thought for a moment and understood. The nature of the two-headed spirit snake was lustful. One of them was yang while the other was yin. The toxicity of the two snakes was naturally divided into yin and yang. If one was bitten by only one snake, it would be dangerous. If one was bitten by two snakes at the same time, the yin and yang snake venom would work together. Even a nascent soul and spirit severing cultivator would have a hard time keeping their life. Martial Uncle Zhen Qing. This is a matter of life and death. Why didn't you record it down? Xiaohua laughed bitterly in his heart. I promised Manor Lord Qin to let her pick a few more spiritual herbs. Therefore, I made some preparations. Zhu Qinghe said, however, my methods are not good enough. I can only confuse the two-headed snake for a few breaths. Xiaohua, if you want to pick the heavenly Een grass, you have to be faster. Thank you, Senior. Xiaohua let out a big breath. He was very glad that he was able to come. Otherwise, with Qin Yi's personality and temper, how could she waste time on spiritual herbs that were unrelated to her? Wait a moment. Wait for my command. Zhu Qinghe cautiously walked close to the green barrier and didn't dare to move forward. With a clap of his hand, he took out a crimson incense stick from his bosom. He twirled it with his 2 fingers and a thin wisp of smoke came out of it. The smoke was also strange. After rising about a foot into the air, it began to dissipate in circles. Zhu Qinghe waved his hand, and the incense stick landed in front of his feet, at the edge of the green barrier. Then, he reached into his robes and took out 2 bronze willow leaves. He carefully placed them near the incense stick. Then, Zhu Qinghe quietly walked to the other side of the incense stick, and Qin Yi and the others followed him. Shoo! Zhu Qinghe whispered, this celestial silkworm phase is made from a kind of fragrant silkworm excrement, which attracts poisonous insects the most. The thin silk leaves are also the favorite of the double-headed snake. Thin silk gene? Chen Yi exclaimed in a low voice, fellow Taoist Jew, is this the legendary thin thread gene that can paralyze Mo Zhao for 10 breaths? Yes, that's right, this is it. Zhu Qinghe lowered his voice and said, if we want to pass through here, we have to face the double-headed snake. If we had magical power, everything would be easy. But now, we can only do this. Then he glanced at Xiaohua and said, although the thin silk leaves can paralyze Mo Zhao for 10 breaths, it may not be able to paralyze the double-headed snake for 10 breaths. But I don't know how much it can paralyze the double-headed snake. Anyway, we don't need to pick up the spiritual herbs. We just need to pass through here, and a few breaths will be enough. Villa Master Chen and Xiaohua, you have to be careful. Shoo, over there, the double-headed snake is coming out. Zhu Qinghe stopped talking and pointed his finger. Sure enough, in the middle of the green barrier where Zhu Qinghe was, there was a rustling sound coming from the green grass, and the spiritual herbs swayed slightly. Then a red and white snake, about a foot long and as thick as a chopstick, raised its head from the spiritual herbs. Sure enough, it had 2 heads. One of them was so white that it was almost transparent, while the other was as red as fire. The eyes on both heads were pitch black, and the two snake tongues were rapidly flicking in and out of the snakes' mouths. Moreover, the two tongues were looking in the direction of Zhu Qinghe and the others. They were even swimming toward Zhu Qinghe and the others. Xie Zhiqian took a breath of cold air and moved back a little. Then he saw Zhu Qinghe standing there motionlessly, and his face was slightly red. He saw the double-headed snake swim to the edge of the green barrier, and it seemed to be afraid of the ice on this side. It hesitated for a moment, then stopped and spat out its tongue at Zhu Qinghe and the others with a hissing sound. Zhu Qinghe only calmly watched and didn't move. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the double-headed snake suddenly turned its head, as if it had smelled the heavenly silkworm fragrance. It very excitedly twisted its two heads and swam over at an extremely fast speed. In about 5 breaths of time, it reached the side of the thin strands. 5 breaths of time. If the thin strands had 5 or even 8 breaths of time, they would have enough time to pick a few spiritual herbs. Xiao Hua secretly calculated while watching. Facing the 2 thin strands, the double-headed snake actually had enough vigilance. It didn't immediately swallow the 2 leaves like Xiao Hua had thought. Instead, it stretched out its snake head and carefully looked. It even turned its head and looked in the direction of Xiao Hua and the others. Then, it swallowed the thin strands into its stomach. "Let's go!" Seeing that the double-headed snake had swallowed the thin thread, its upright snake head became slightly limp. Both snake heads crawled and its pitch-black snake eyes closed. Zhu Qinghe let out a low roar. He took the lead and strode into the green spirit grass. Then, he ran towards the opposite side of the spirit grass that was 1 zhang away. Xiao Hua had already prepared his power. When he heard Zhu Qinghe's voice, he rushed towards the heavenly yin grass. Although he had already concealed it, the ethereal steps was unknowingly used. Like moving clouds and flowing water, he easily arrived in front of the heavenly yin grass. Then, with a wave of his hand, the devil spear's tip appeared in his hand. Swish, swish, swish. Not only was the heavenly yin grass uprooted, but the other spiritual herbs beside it were also pulled out along with the soil. Then, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the spiritual herbs were stored into the space. At this time, Zhu Qinghe and the others had already run to the edge of the green barrier. Xiao Hua slightly tilted his head. When he looked at the double-headed snake, the double-headed snake had already gradually stood upright and turned its head to look at them. It's actually only 4 breaths. Xiao Hua was startled. He didn't have time to pick up the other spiritual herbs. His feet slipped, and he ran behind Zhu Qinghe and the others. Behind him, the double-headed snake was swimming rapidly among the spiritual herbs. It was really like lightning as it rushed toward Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua's ethereal steps was really powerful. Although he was still some distance away from the green barrier, his figure was like a wisp of smoke, swaying above the spiritual herbs. In a few breaths, he reached the edge. Just as his feet left the barrier, the double-headed snake pounced. The 2 snake heads stretched out and bit the place where Xiao Hua's heels had just left. Good. Zhu Qinghe couldn't help but shout. Chen Yi, who was beside Xiao Hua, was also gasping for breath as she escaped from the barrier at the same time as Xiao Hua. However, Xiao Hua was blocking in front of her, so the double-headed snake didn't attack Chen Yi. Phew, Xiao Hua let out a long breath and patted his chest. Chen Yi's face was also deathly pale as she stroked her towering chest. Xiao Hua, your movement technique is somewhat strange. Seems somewhat similar to the so-called innate martial Tao of the Dawn Rain continent? Zhu Qinghe asked with a slight frown. Good, I'll let Senior Zhu know. Xiao Hua said with a smile, before this junior refined qi, I had indeed practiced martial arts for a few days. I didn't expect that I would actually be able to use it here. Oh, so that's how it is. Zhu Qinghe nodded and seemed to be somewhat pensive. I didn't expect that you still had a trick up your sleeve. Chen Yi sneered at the side, I only picked a stalk of silver feather flower. Not only did you pick the sky yin grass, you even picked the harmony grass and the twin fruit. Your harvest is quite bountiful. Hee hee, Xiao Hua laughed and clapped his hands. He took out a spiritual herb that he didn't recognize and handed it to Chin Yi, saying, "This junior was just passing by and gave it to Villa Master Chin. Many thanks to Villa Master Chin for giving this junior this opportunity." "And that's more like it." Chen Yi took the spiritual herb and said with a smile, "Xiaohua understands martial arts. This is actually good news." Zhu Qing has said with a smile, "It will be of great use in a while." Xiaohua's heart gave birth to a trace of a bad feeling. However, he could only brace himself and say, "This junior's seniors have helped a lot. If I can help, this junior will do his best to help." "Of course you have to do your best." Zhu Qing has said with a smile, "We have been preparing for several years. You have benefited greatly by following us. How can you not do your best?" Then he turned to Chang Yefeng and said, "Fellow Taoist Chang, now that we are here, it should be time for you to receive it." Chang Yefeng nodded and glanced around the lava. He frowned and said, "My fellow cultivator Zhu, you didn't say that we couldn't use our magic power and spiritual thoughts in this place. Therefore, I took the heavenly mirror without hesitation. However, this area is very wide. Without the support of magic power and divine sense, how can I find the hidden cave?" Clear sky mirror. These three words were like thunder in Xiaohua's ears. However, after the thunder passed, Xiaohua's mind was blank again. It seemed that he couldn't remember anything at all. This young master seems to have a magic tool called the clear sky mirror before. This magic tool, is this young master's? Where did Chang Yefeng get this young master's magic tool? Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at Chang Yefeng. It seemed that Chang Yefeng was his enemy. Hehe. Zhu Qinghe heard Chang Yefeng's words and only laughed. He said, "Of course I know there are some difficulties. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found fellow Taoist Chang, right? In fact, there are many magic tools similar to the clear sky mirror on the Dawn Rain continent. Fellow Taoist Chang was the first person I thought of. Perhaps it's fate between fellow Taoist Chang and the sword spirit?" But Chang Yefeng clapped his hands and took out a square magic tool about 1 foot in size. He smiled bitterly and said, "Fellow Taoist Jew, you'd better find a smaller area." "No problem. Fellow Taoists, please follow me," Zhu Qing has said and led the group to the right. At this moment, there was a man and a woman standing beside the ice spring that Xiaohua and the others used to enter the third level. Chapter 2015. There were 2 cultivators beside the cold spring. The man was tall and thin, with bright eyes and sword-like eyebrows. The lines on his face were as if they were carved by a knife. He was abnormally stern. The woman had a graceful figure, delicate features, and a heroic spirit. She was far from being comparable to Qin Yi's bearing. The 2 people stood there very straight. Although they were not on guard, there was a kind of coldness and a kind of sword intent on their bodies. They were like 2 sharp swords that had been unsheathed. It seemed that they were not inferior to the coldness that had rushed into the space. These 2 people were actually swordsmen Duan Yuming and Wang Shuyao from the Huan country's Huan sword sect. However, at this time, the sword intent on their bodies was much more restrained than when they first came from the Huan country to the Meng country. It was obviously the result of their great improvement in cultivation. The 2 people seemed to have stood there for a long time. Wang Shuyao was a little impatient. She looked at the hole where the cold spring disappeared and said in a low voice, "Senior Marshal Brother, I'm afraid they have already gone. They won't be guarding inside. We should go in early. Otherwise, if we lose track of them, we will have come in vain." "Junior Marshal Sister, don't be anxious." Duan Yuming stared at the coldness in the hole and frowned slightly. He said calmly, "When we entered the second layer just now, we were a little careless. We were actually discovered by that Foundation establishment brat. Although he didn't find our tracks, he must have already told those gold core cultivators. Although they didn't come out to look for us, I'm afraid they have already set up a trap under this hole and are waiting for us to fall. Let's wait a little longer." We should have killed that little Foundation establishment stage cultivator with a single sword strike. He's just a shield. Just now, he lured the sky-piercing vine away and was lucky enough to escape. If we kill him, those golden core stage cultivators won't necessarily know. Wang Shuyao said coldly. That little foundation establishment brat's hands and feet are not weak. There is a hint of sword Dao. Our sword origin is restricted. If we are careless and leak our tracks, we will wake up those gold core cultivators. Wouldn't all our previous efforts be wasted? Duan Yuming shook his head slightly. They are just a few gold core cultivators. Just kill them all. Wang Shuyao was still unconvinced. We've killed more than 1 or 2 Jindan stage cultivators in the past few years in the cultivation world. Now that we've entered the 3rd grade of the illusory sword realm, wouldn't killing a few Jindan stage cultivators be as easy as lifting a finger? Duan Yuming stared at the spirit herbs in front of him thoughtfully, then he replied, sword cultivator, it's true that we improve through battles. If we were in Huan Kingdom, unless we were fighting with millions of Meng Mountains, how could we improve our cultivation base so quickly? However, it is precisely because we have killed so many cultivators that I fear some nascent soul cultivators will want to kill us. No way. Wang Shuyao was slightly taken aback. We were extremely careful when we killed them. If they were from a big sect, we definitely wouldn't provoke them. Only small sects would make a move. Moreover, once we made a move, we definitely wouldn't leave anyone alive. It's impossible for them to have a hold on us. Besides, would those nascent soul cultivators dare to attack us? Aren't you afraid of incurring the enmity of us sword cultivators? Wang Shuyao said disdainfully. That's true. Duan Yuming laughed. They're probably afraid of harming us. Bah, you're the rat. Wang Shuyao spat and scolded jokingly. Hee hee. A hint of sweetness appeared on Duan Yuming's face. He didn't retort, but explained again, it's not that I don't want to kill those golden core cultivators. Look at this hole and the spirit herbs beside it. It must be some powerful restriction. We don't know anything about this place, but they've been preparing for several years. Why don't we let them lead the way? When they find Senior Li Xiaobai's 9 stars transverse sun sword spirit, wouldn't it be better for us to be the mantises chasing after the cicadas? Bah, senior brother, why don't we be the Oriole? Wang Shuyao spat a few more times and said. Duan Yuming smiled foolishly. Junior sister, whatever you say. Wang Shuyao looked at the hole under her feet and sneered again. These cultivators are really delusional. Although we're all sword cultivators, how can the sword spirit of us sword cultivators compare to the flying swords of cultivators? They're indulging in fantasy. Can they practice flying swords just because they obtain the sword spirit? Can they have the attack of us sword cultivators? Can they compete with us sword cultivators? That's true. Duan Yuming smiled apologetically. How would they know that the sword spirit is loyal to the person who nurtured it? It's useless for others to take it. The most precious thing that Senior Li Xiaobai left here isn't the 9 sword spirits, but his 9 stars transverse sun sword intent. Hee hee, cultivators only know about magic power, how would they know about sword intent? Even if they obtained Senior Li Xiaobai's sword pill, they can't get the sword intent in it. Wang Shuyao said coldly. They can only let the sword pill gather dust. Casting pearls before swine. That's right. Duan Yuming's handsome face was filled with respect. The seniors of Flame Bamboo Sword Sect searched for a long time in Meng, but they didn't expect Senior Li Xiaobai's sword pill to land in Shi. If not for us being lucky and hearing someone asking about the refinement of the sword pill, we wouldn't have been able to find out that these little golden core cultivators were actually coveting Senior Li Xiaobai's sword pill. The problem is that they really found the location of the sword pill. Wang Shuyao nodded. And the place that they found was exactly the same as the place that the seniors of Xian Sword Sect had predicted. Now that we've met them and followed them for so many years, we can't help but say that it's fate. It's Senior Li Xiaobai's spirit in heaven that protected us. Duan Yuming echoed. This 9 stars transverse sun sword intent still belongs to the sword cultivators of my Huan country. Naturally, if not for Senior Li Xiaobai's spirit in heaven, how would we have accidentally searched that foundation establishment female cultivator's soul that day? Wang Shuyao's face showed a trace of excitement. If not for the soul search, how would we know that this cultivator called Zhu Qinghe was looking for the refinement method of the sword pill? If not for finding this Zhu Qinghe, how would we have followed him to Flame Bamboo Sword Sect? I believe that this guy still hasn't thought that the one who told him the refinement method of the sword pill was this sword's arrangement? Otherwise, how would a cultivator like him be able to find out the refinement method of the sword pill so easily? That's right, even if it was the secret place where they gathered, it was also hard for us to find it. This Zhu Qinghe has a lot of evasion spells. He almost escaped. Duan Yuming still agreed. This is also junior sister's intuition. I admire it very much. That's for sure. Wang Shuyao was a little proud. My intuition has always been shocking. It's not like I haven't told you before. The ink storm in the Black Forest lasted for almost a year. If not for me by your side, I'm afraid that you would have long given up, right? Yes, junior sister is right. Duan Yuming replied. The ink storm was so rampant, how could a few golden core cultivators survive? Moreover, because of this, we lost track of their whereabouts. In such a huge black forest, how could we find them? That day, I was indeed abnormally depressed. Chapter 2016. It's useless to be depressed and kill a few cultivators to vent your anger. Wang Shuyao smiled. Her curved eyes were like crescent moons. My intuition tells me that they'll definitely escape and enter again. And the place that I'm thinking of isn't too far off, right? Duan Yuming gave her a thumbs up and praised, junior sister is indeed wise. That Zhu Qinghe is gone, but Qin Yi and the rest are still there. If we tail them, wouldn't it be the same as finding Zhu Qinghe? Speaking of this, Duan Yuming frowned again and said, but I still feel that something is wrong. But Wang Shuyao asked curiously, I don't feel it. Could it be that we've been discovered by them? That little foundation establishment. Duan Yuming shook his head and said, the one called Xiaohua is a little strange. Mo Bao is so big, but he's completely fine. The sky-climbing vine is also very powerful. Even you and I have to retreat, but he still managed to escape. It's really strange. Senior brother, you're right. Wang Shuyao nodded, and a trace of seriousness appeared on her face. I also have a trace of doubt in my heart. However, Wang Shuyao immediately raised her head and proudly said, even if he's concealed his cultivation, he's nothing compared to the two of us sword cultivators who possess offensive power close to that of a nascent soul cultivator. Senior brother, don't worry. When we go in later, it's fine if he dies. If he dies, we can use the one-heart sword technique and kill him. When you and I find the sword intent of the 9 stars soaring sun, our cultivation will soon break through to sword transformation realm. It won't be a waste for us to stay in the cultivation world for so many years. Duan Yuming looked at Wang Shuyao with affection in his eyes. Sigh, it's a pity that there's no news of Yutong and Yuhi. Wang Shuyao sighed and said, we only found Yutong's flying sword and nothing else. We can't explain it to the sword master. It doesn't matter. As long as we don't find their whereabouts, as long as we don't return to the Huan sword sect, we'll be a fugitive Mandarin duck in the cultivation world. Duan Yuming gritted his teeth and seemed to say these words word by word. Wang Shuyao was obviously stunned. She stared at Duan Yuming for a long time, and tears welled up in her eyes. Her 2 small hands clenched tightly as she muttered, Senior brother? These words. You finally said them. This little sister? I thought I would never hear them in this lifetime. Duan Yuming's face was flushed red again, as if he had drunk a lot of spirit wine. I was afraid that you would reject me. How could this little sister reject you? Wang Shuyao was also abnormally shy. She said in a low voice, this little sister was afraid that senior brother would make things difficult for you, so I didn't dare. When you and I obtain sword intent and cultivate to the sword transformation stage. Duan Yuming suddenly realized something when he spoke up to hear. Wang Shuyao also realized something, and a happy smile appeared in her eyes. She pointed her finger and said, Senior martial brother, let's not talk about it anymore. We should go down earlier and see if those golden core cultivators have already found Senior Li Xiubai's 9 stars transit of the sun. Yes, Junior sister, come with me. As he spoke, Duan Yuming stretched out his hand. Wang Shuyao hesitated for a moment before reaching out her hand. The two shook hands. In front of the lava, Xiao Hua and the rest followed Zhu Qinghe around a corner. It was as if they were walking on the rugged bottom of a valley, and they came to a place where there were no bumps and depressions. Zhu Qinghe stood there and stared at it for a long time. Then, he shook his head and walked to another place. He looked again and still shook his head. After a few times, Xie Zhiqian asked in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Zhu, is there no suitable place? I won't hide it from fellow Taoists Xie. How could it be so easy to find the place where Li Xiubai and Taoist Master Brightsword fought?" Zhu Qinghe smiled bitterly. "This is just my own guess. If it could be found so quickly, I'm afraid that the previous seniors would have already found it." Xie Zhiqian said no more. He knew that Zhu Qinghe was telling the truth. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Zhu Qinghe was somewhat dejected. He clenched his teeth and said, "I really can't find any trace of it. As for the clear sky mirror, it seems that I can only let fellow Taoist Chang use it once. I have no choice but to risk my life." As he spoke, Zhu Qinghe took out a palm-sized, purple-colored octagonal disc from his bosom. He said, "I obtained this from the Huan country. It is said that it can be used to detect sword essence. However, I don't have sword essence, so I can't use it. I can only use my blood to activate it, and the range is limited." When Chang Yefeng and the others heard this, their faces unconsciously showed respect. They all nodded and said, "Thank you, fellow Taoist Zhu." But Zhu Qinghe took out a scarlet spirit pill from his bosom and put it into his mouth without hesitation. His face quickly turned dark red. Zhu Qinghe threw the octagonal disc into the air. Zhu Qinghe spat out a mouthful of blood onto the disc. When the disc was stained with blood, it immediately emitted a layer of light. This light was different from the light of ordinary magic treasures. It was like a fluorescent light, like flowing water. Moreover, there was a threatening coldness that was like a sharp sword piercing through his skin. Zhu Qinghe immediately took out a sword-shaped talisman from his bosom. He used his left hand to force out the magic power from the spirit pill, and the talisman shone brightly, transforming into the shape of a small sword. "Go!" Zhu Qinghe scolded softly. The small sword in his hand flew out and entered the octagonal plate. Woo-woo! A buzzing sound came from the octagonal plate, and the brilliance of the octagonal plate became more and more dazzling. Then, Zhu Qinghe spat out 3 mouthfuls of blood onto the octagonal disc. Zhu Qinghe's face was pale, and the octagonal disc turned purple. Buzz! With a buzzing sound, the light on the octagonal disc suddenly disappeared. A little sword light appeared from the center of the octagonal disc. The sword light instantly increased in size and turned into the shape of the small sword that just fell into the octagonal disc. At this time, Zhu Qinghe's body was slightly trembling. His hand that was holding the octagonal disc seemed to be holding a boulder as it slightly tilted down. Ka! Another sound was heard. Like a sword being unsheathed, the small sword finally flew out from the octagonal disc. The tail of the small sword still had a trace of brilliance that was connected to the octagonal disc. "Quick! Follow the small sword." Zhu Qinghe saw the small sword rush out and fly to the other side of the lava. He quickly caught up and ordered Xiao Hua. Yes. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. His feet moved, and sure enough, he was a step faster than Xie Zhiqian and the others. He was the first to grab the lava, but that small sword was even faster. It streaked across the air with a crimson brilliance and disappeared into a crack. Although Xiao Hua was a bit slower, he still saw the place where the small sword disappeared. When he arrived at the crack, he couldn't help but be stunned. This was where the 2 streams of lava intersected. The gap was about the width of a finger, and it led straight to the top of the stone wall. Vaguely, there was some light shining through it, but there was nothing special about it at all. After Xiao Hua looked around, Qin Yi and the others caught up. Zhu Qinghe was actually the last. "It's here." Chen didn't seem to believe it. After all, it was really a crack. "Yes, I saw the small sword fly in here." Xiao Hua nodded. "However, I don't know where it landed." "Good." Zhu Qinghe praised. He put the octagonal disc into his arms and said to Chang Yefeng with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Chang, your clear sky mirror should be able to cover this area, right? It should be able to." Chang Yefeng nodded. He also took out a scarlet pill and swallowed it. As the pill's efficacy increased, Chang Yefeng tossed the supreme sky mirror into the air. It let out a clear ring and flashed with a swamp light. Xiao Huan narrowed his eyes and stared at the magic treasure. The corners of his mouth moved slightly. No one knew what he was thinking. Similarly, Chang Yefeng was also chanting. His hands were constantly making complicated seals, and he hit the clear sky mirror one after another. As the seals were hit, the clear sky mirror's brilliance didn't increase. Instead, it became dimmer and dimmer. Even the edges of the mirror began to disappear. The surface of the mirror was originally clear and there was no image. Now, it was slowly reflecting the surrounding scenery. Oh no! Seeing that Chang Yefeng's seals were getting slower and slower, and the clear sky mirror was still not completely hidden. The scenery on the mirror was still very clear. Chang Yefeng gritted his teeth and spat a mouthful of essence blood on the clear sky mirror. Buzz buzz, a loud sound was heard. It was louder than the sound of the octagonal disc. The entire clear sky mirror emitted a dazzling clear light. In the clear light, the clear sky mirror's shape completely disappeared, leaving only a round mirror surface. The mirror surface reflected the surrounding scarlet lava. Oh, I understand. Seeing the scarlet surface of the clear sky mirror, Xiaohua suddenly realized that the clear sky mirror was the same as his Dharma eyes. It should be able to see the fluctuations of the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. That was why it could see the location of the duel between Li Xiubai and immortal Ming Jian. Chang Yefeng waved his hand weakly, and the mirror surface of the clear sky mirror flew into his hand. Chang Yefeng pushed his hand. Through the fiery red mirror surface, a round object about the height of a person appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Quick! Just as Zhu Qinghe and the others were delighted, Chang Yefeng forcefully shouted again. A faint, indistinct green light was emitted from the mirror surface and hit the round object. Swish! Like rainwater rushing through the lava in front of them, ripples flashed on the lava. In a moment, a cave identical to the one on the clear sky mirror appeared in front of everyone. Great! Zhu Qinghe clapped his hands and said, "The clear sky mirror is so magical. I really didn't expect that fellow Taoist Chang would save my Dharma Chi." Cough cough. Chang Yefeng put away the clear sky mirror and said with a bitter smile, "Fellow Taoist Zhu has already spent a lot of effort just now. This time, it's my turn to help. Otherwise, I won't have the face to take the sword pill." Hearing this, Xie Zhiqian's face was slightly unnatural. Chapter 2017. Let's go, we'll go in. Zhu Qinghe waved his hand and glanced at Xiaohua. "Xiaohua, we're a bit exhausted right now, so our physical strength can't compare to yours. You lead the way. If there's an extra sword spirit, I'll give you one. How about it?" Xiaohua shook his head with a bitter smile. "Senior, thank you for your kindness. I can lead the way, but I don't want that sword spirit boy. After all, I don't know how to use a flying sword." "Okay, go ahead. I'll compensate you." Qin Yi nodded. "We Jindan stage seniors won't let you suffer losses." "Yes." Xiaohua bowed and was about to enter the cave. "Xiaohua, where's the otherworldly item you got from the Feather Immortal Assembly?" Qin Yi suddenly asked. "Ah?" Xiaohua was taken aback. Then he smiled apologetically. "I'll let Villa Master Qin know. That thing is really too heavy. I can't put it in my storage bag. Moreover, I can't carry it with me. Therefore, I put it in the myriad Thunder Valley." Chen Yi's beautiful eyes looked at Xiaohua, not saying anything. On the other hand, Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. He had told Qin Yi many things, but he hadn't said anything important. Xiaohua had a guilty conscience about the great wisdom heavy sword, so he hadn't said anything. However, he didn't expect that. Chen Yi actually knew about it. At this moment, Xiaohua was a bit regretful. Thinking about the Feather Immortal Assembly, the Great Wisdom Sword, and the matter of Fairy Hong Xia. Damn it. Xiaohua's scalp went numb when he thought about it. The Feather Immortal Assembly is held once every 10 years. The 3 cultivation kingdoms of the Dawn Rain continent have held it countless times. Could it be that Qin-Yi really went to inquire about it? Alas, I really can't lie too much. Every time I lie, I have to use 10 or even 100 lies to cover it up. If this continues, this lie will eventually be exposed. Forget it. Seeing that Qin-Yi didn't ask any more questions, Xiaohua braced himself and walked inside. Zhu Qinghe frowned and turned to look at Qin-Yi. However, Qin-Yi ignored him. Zhu Qinghe had no choice but to ignore her. After Xie Zhiqian and Xiaohua, the group of 5 entered the cave. The inside of the cave was very tranquil, and a slight heat was surging in. His divine sense still couldn't be used, but a faint light penetrated from the distance. Xiaohua walked cautiously, and he didn't encounter any danger. Of course, in such a dangerous place, how could Xiaohua not open his left hand's delirium eyes? In his transcendence vision, everything outside the cave was fiery red, but there was nothing wrong with the inside of the cave. Just like the soft footsteps in his ears, everything was normal. As they walked to the center of the cave, faint rumbling sounds could be heard from the end of the cave. Xiaohua was startled and raised his head. At the same time, he also raised his transcendence vision. He saw that not far away, at the end of the cave, there were flashes of red light falling down. That's it! Zhu Qinghe exclaimed in surprise. Everyone, including Xiaohua, quickened their steps. When they reached the end and looked to the left, everyone was overjoyed. At the end of the cave was lava. Looking to the left, there was a huge space. Inside the space, there was a faint sky light coming from somewhere, illuminating the entire space. Sword case. Zhu Qinghe blurted out and pointed. Sure enough, in the center of the space, there was a 3 feet long and 3 inches wide sword case on top of a bulging rock. Sword pill. Chang Yefeng also laughed. Beside the sword case, there were several sword pills with cracks on them. These sword pills were different in size, and they were exactly the same as the one Xiaohua was refining. It's really 8. Chen-Yi was beaming with joy. If we add fellow Taoist Jews, it'll be 9. These 8 sword pills are just as we planned, 2 for each of us. That's strange. Where's that buzzing sound just now? Xiaohua asked in surprise. These sword pellets had a sword spirit. Xiaohua had long wanted to find a sword spirit and see what it was. These sword pellets were definitely a great temptation to him. However, he still didn't dare to be too impatient. Wait, Zhu Qinghe said in a low voice. He looked around and said in a low voice, "It's a bit strange. Why is there no protection in such an important place?" However, everyone stood outside the space for a moment. The entire space was quiet. Where was the buzzing sound? Xiaohua, I asked you just now. Are you willing to help us? Zhu Qinghe said solemnly, as you can see, we've been preparing for several years. We've spent a lot of spirit stones and energy. If you can bring those sword pills over, this penniless Taoist will give them to you. Furthermore, this penniless Taoist will give you the sword pill and also give you the manual to cultivate the flying sword. This. Xiaohua looked hesitant and pretended to hesitate. Xiaohua, if we don't get those sword pills, we won't go out. Chen-Yi said with a smile. You can choose not to help, or you can have other plans. But if we all die here, can you afford to leave? Moreover, if you don't go. Chen-Yi said no more, but the threat was self-evident. Hearing Chen-Yi's threat, Xiaohua was unhappy. He looked at the 4 people and muttered. If he relied on his physical body, he could probably resist 2 or 4 people. However, he didn't have the kind of spirit pill that Zhu Qinghe took. If 2 of them took a spirit pill that stimulated magic power at the same time, he definitely wouldn't be their opponent. Xiaohua, my vitality has been greatly injured. Otherwise, I would have gone this time. Chang Yefeng stepped forward and said with a smile, actually, fellow Taoist Xiao invited your sect's Master Zhenyi that day to use the speed of your sect's lightning escape technique to get those sword pills. And this junior understands. Xiaohua frowned, then turned to Zhu Qinghe and said, Junior can go and give it a try. However, I would like to ask Senior to tell me about the danger in detail. Otherwise, Junior will be confused and might lose his life. Cough cough. Zhu Qinghe knew what Xiaohua was referring to. He coughed twice and said, Xiaohua, you are a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Your status is different from ours. Although your cultivation is low, we have to be on guard against you. Perhaps you can understand everything that happened before. As for the danger now. Zhu Qinghe pointed at the sword pills and sword sheath and said, these are probably Master Bright Sword's flying swords and Senior Li Xiubai's sword pills. Since they are placed there, there must be a restriction around them. We don't have divine sense, and our magic power can only be activated for a moment. Right now, there isn't much difference between you and us. If you can take those sword pills, I can also give them to you. Manor Lord Chen and the others will be convinced, don't you think? Xiaohua squinted his eyes and looked at the stone. He seemed to be thinking about it, but in reality he had already opened his Dharma eyes and carefully examined the side of the stone. Then he sighed and said, all right, since all of you think so highly of this junior, then this junior can only help all of you. However, Senior must give the sword orb to this junior. Chapter 2018. Hee, since you're so worried, I'll give it to you now. Zhu Qinghe took out the sword pill from his bosom and threw it to Xiaohua. Oh! Xiaohua didn't expect Zhu Qinghe to be so forthright, but his heart was at ease. After all, from what he saw with his Dharma eye, there was nothing beside the stone, and there were no restrictions. He only needed to go over and pick up the sword pellet. There was no danger at all. On the contrary, the 8 small and sharp lights inside the sword pellet and the red flying sword lights inside the sword sheath made Xiaohua really happy. Zhu Qinghe was right. These were the flying swords and sword pills left behind by Master Bright Sword and Li Xiubai. This is the sword pill? Xiaohua took it and pretended to be curious. Zhu Qinghe said unhappily, Xiaohua, you should go over and try it. You can't expect me to give you the sword art right now, right? Hee, there's no need. Xiaohua smiled and put the sword pill into his bosom. He said with a smile, Senior knows how to give Junior a medicinal pill that promotes magic power. Junior will use the flying technique to give those sword pills to Senior. Zhu Qinghe smiled bitterly. That's for gold core cultivators to use. Your meridians are weak, so you can't use it. Chen Yi glanced at Zhu Qinghe and clapped her hands. She took out a jade bottle and handed it to Xiaohua. She said, this is the bamboo marrow of Yulan bamboo. Although it can't be compared to the spirit pill you want, it's better in terms of its calmness. You can use it with your foundation establishment cultivation. Hee, just keep it in your mouth and swallow it when you need it. I hope you won't need it. Many thanks, Manor Head Chen. Xiaohua received it with a smile. Then, he held the jade bottle in his hand and a drop of the jade-like liquid emitting a faint bamboo fragrance dripped into his mouth. Then, Xiaohua stepped towards the sword pill on the stone and held the jade bottle in his hand. He was still waiting to take the sword pill and put the bamboo marrow into the jade bottle. Moreover, Xiaohua even muttered in his heart. Should he take away all the sword pills and not leave a single one for Zhu Qinghe and the others? After all, with this drop of bamboo marrow, Xiaohua had enough confidence to kill these 4 people. Seeing Xiaohua carefully walk into the stone, Zhu Qinghe and the other 3's faces showed nervousness. However, unlike Chang Yefeng and Xie Zhiqian's nervousness, Zhu Qinghe and Qin Yi's eyes still had some anxiety. The 2 of them even tilted their heads slightly and looked at each other. However, when Xiaohua walked to the edge of the rock, there was still no movement. Xiaohua stopped and stretched out his left hand. After looking at it for a moment, he turned his head and said with a smile, Senior Zhu, I'm afraid this junior will have to take advantage of you. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand to take the sword pellets, while Chen Yi's face revealed a trace of disappointment. But it just so happened that right at this moment, the buzzing sound that everyone heard just now suddenly rang out. Xiaohua was stunned, and he hurriedly raised his left hand to meet the eye. An extremely brilliant red light flashed past, and even his eye couldn't help but close. Ah? Hearing the exclamations of Zhu Qinghe and the rest, Xiaohua immediately knew that the situation was bad. A crimson-red sword light was born from the sword sheath beside the sword pellet, and a fierce sharpness and intimidating aura instantly enveloped Xiao Hua. Shit! Xiao Hua didn't expect that the flying sword from the sword sheath would suddenly attack. While he was greatly alarmed, he immediately swallowed the jade essence into the air. Instantly, a warm current flowed through his meridians like true essence. Xiao Hua urged his magic power without hesitation and immediately used the bright thunder escape. In addition to the misty steps under his feet, his entire body flew to the side. However, Xiao Hua had just urged his magic power, and his body had only moved 3 feet when the true essence formed by the jade essence suddenly disappeared. His magic power flowed out, and Xiao Hua's body naturally stagnated for a moment. At this moment, the sword light that was more than 3 feet long chopped at the top of Xiao Hua's head. Xiao Hua was greatly alarmed, and his feet staggered in succession, wanting to block this mountain-like sword light. Unfortunately, that sword light was set up by Taoist Master Bright Sword. That was a flying sword of a nascent soul cultivator, and it was the work of great magic power. If Xiao Hua had the bright thunder escape, he might still have a chance. But now, how could he dodge it by relying on misty steps, this kind of extreme movement technique? Seeing the incomparable sword light chopping down at a speed that Xiao Hua couldn't think of, Xiao Hua held the great wisdom sword in his hand without hesitation and raised it up, wanting to block the flying sword. But with a loud dang, the sword light above Xiao Hua's head was blocked. A huge force was transmitted to Xiao Hua's body, and then to his feet. A shining crack appeared under Xiao Hua's feet. At the same time, the tip of the red sword light suddenly bent down like a soft sword, and the speed at which it chopped down was twice as fast as before. Xiao Hua simply didn't have time to dodge. With a piu sound, it neatly chopped his back. A burst of brilliance flashed, and Xiao Hua's protective spirit armor was only able to resist for a moment before it was split into 2 by that incomparable sword light. Xiao Hua let out a heart-wrenching scream, and his entire body fell into the brilliance that appeared under his feet. The unforeseen event that Xiao Hua encountered was really too fast. That sword light flashed and disappeared. Although Xiao Hua flew for a distance, in the eyes of Zhu Qinghe and the others, it was only an instant. The brilliance of Xiao Hua's spirit armor was annihilated, and they saw it with their own eyes. Xiao Hua's heart-wrenching scream was also heard by them. Although Xiao Hua's body fell into the brilliance, they knew that Xiao Hua's body must have been split open by that incomparably sharp sword light. When his body landed on the ground, it would definitely split into 2 halves. Hiss! After a moment, Xie Zhiqian took a deep breath, and his eyes were filled with joy. Indeed, if Xiao Hua hadn't come here, the one who would have been split into 2 halves by that sword light would have definitely been him. Fellow Taoist Xie. Zhu Qinghe's voice sounded by his ear again. According to our agreement, this time it should be fellow Taoist Xie's turn to step forward. This. Xie Zhiqian was a little surprised. It's fine. Chen Yi said with a smile. As long as it's an ownerless flying sword, it only has the power for 1 attack. Xiao Hua is dead, so naturally there won't be any danger. Don't be afraid. Alright. Xie Zhiqian understood that he was similar to Xiao Hua. That is, the Fire Bat King was his effort, and everything else was arranged by Zhu Qinghe. If he didn't go, who else would go? Xie Zhiqian took out a scarlet spirit pill and put it in his mouth. Then, like Xiao Hua, he cautiously approached the sword pellet. At this moment, Xie Zhiqian didn't look at anything else but the sword case. He was prepared to wait for the sword case to change, then he would leave and flee. Fortunately, until Xie Zhiqian touched the sword pellet, the sword case didn't have any movement. That terrifying buzzing sound just now also didn't come out in the slightest. Great. Xie Zhiqian picked up a sword pellet and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Jew, it's fine. These 8 sword pellets are now ours. Ha! Chang Yefeng laughed and walked to Xie Zhiqian's side. He reached out and grabbed the 2 largest sword pellets and said, There are exactly 8 of them. We each have 2, and this trip is complete. That's right, it's complete. This is the completion of our Huan country's sword cultivation. 2 cold voices came from behind Zhu Qinghe. A rainbow-like sword light and a sword light like a fish in the sea flew out at the same time. They drew a dazzling brilliance in the air and pierced toward Xie Zhiqian and Chang Yefeng. Ah? Xie Zhiqian was shocked. He didn't have time to touch the sword pellet. He swallowed the spirit pill in his mouth and waved his hand. A meteor-like flying sword met Duan Yuming's rainbow sword. He also slapped his hand and took out a shield-like magic treasure from his storage bag. Clang! Xie Zhiqian's flying sword collided with the rainbow sword and was immediately annihilated by the rainbow sword's sword light. Immediately after, it was knocked into the air, and the brilliance on the sword disappeared. Like a piece of scrap metal, it hit the stone wall and fell to the ground. Fellow Taoist Jew, save me! This was Chang Yefeng's cry for help. He had just forcefully used the clear sky mirror and his vitality was damaged. It was too late for him to take out a spirit pill. Seeing countless colorful fish surrounding him and about to drown him, he couldn't help but cry out. But just as his voice sounded, the colorful fish immediately opened their mouths and pounced on Chang Yefeng's body. Chang Yefeng's body flashed with brilliance. It was the protective brilliance and the protection of Chang Yefeng's magic treasure. Unfortunately, Wang Shuyao's attack power was comparable to that of a nascent soul stage cultivator. Although her sword origin was restrained, it was not something Chang Yefeng could resist. Puff, puff, puff. Dozens of places on Chang Yefeng's body were ruptured and blood gushed out like a fountain. At the same time, Duan Yuming's rainbow sword suddenly trembled. Like a seven-colored satin, it quickly wrapped around Xie Zhiqian from the bottom to the top. With a muffled sound, Xie Zhiqian's scream could not be heard. Blood spurted out from his neck. Xie Zhiqian's head was chopped off by the rainbow sword. Villa Headchen. Let's hurry. We definitely can't let these two sword cultivators get the sword orb. The sword cultivators' attacks were really powerful. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. Zhu Qinghe only had time to give Chen Yi an order before Chang Yefeng and Xie Zhiqian were already dead. Chen Yi heard him and her body floated up, pouncing on the sword pill. Zhu Qinghe naturally moved in another direction. Wang Shuyao and Duan Yuming sneered and also pounced on the sword pill. The two flying swords were also driven by them and suddenly turned around. But, just as the two of them flew into the air and the flying swords turned around, Zhu Qinghe and Qin Yi suddenly turned around at the same time. They actually went back to the whole of the revolving space. Duan Yuming was stunned and whispered, "Junior sister, go and kill these two people. I'll take Senior's sword pill." "Yes, Senior brother." Wang Shuyao responded and suddenly turned around. The sword light that was like a fish also followed her and chased after Zhu Qinghe and Qin Yi. "Let's go." Zhu Qinghe and Qin Yi's figures landed at the entrance of the cave. They whispered and quickly ran out of the cave. Unfortunately, even though the two of them had prepared elixirs in advance, the amount of spiritual power they could mobilize was still limited. They had just flown less than 10 feet when Wang Shuyao had already caught up. Seeing the layers of fish fiercely pouncing over, Zhu Qinghe was greatly shocked and couldn't help but shout, "Envoy, save me!" Ha! A rough laugh sounded from outside the cave, and a voice came, "Martial nephew Zhu has worked hard to lure these two cunning sword cultivators here. How can we bear to let you lose your life?" Chapter 2019. Who is it? Wang Shuyao was shocked. Just as she was about to retrieve the swimming fish sword, two large hands flew in from outside the cave. One of the large hands slapped down with lightning speed, holding the swimming fish sword in its hand. With a slight force, all the fish were annihilated, leaving only the flying sword in the large hand, which was overflowing with brilliance. Ah? Nascent soul cultivator? Wang Shuyao was shocked. She knew that she had fallen into someone's trap. She couldn't care less about her flying sword being retrieved and turned to escape into the cave. However, the other large hand had already slapped down on Wang Shuyao's head. A fierce aura came from the large hand and shackled Wang Shuyao's body. If she had the swimming fish sword at this time, Wang Shuyao might not be powerless to fight back. She might even be able to break through the big hand. However, now that two nascent soul cultivators were attacking her at the same time, the swimming fish sword was already restrained. All her cultivation was on the flying sword. Under the big hand, she was indeed somewhat helpless. But seeing the large hand about to reach her head, Wang Shuyao's face turned ashen. She gritted her teeth and opened her cherry lips slightly. A mouthful of sword essence was spat out and attacked the large hand. At this moment, the other large hand clenched slightly and Wang Shuyao's flying sword was caught by the large hand. The entire flying sword was actually melted into the shape of a ball. Ah! A scream came from Wang Shuyao's mouth. Her sword essence also dimmed. Taking advantage of this moment, the large hand that was covering Wang Shuyao suddenly slapped down. Wang Shuyao no longer had any power to fight back and her body was slapped to the ground. "Junior sister?" Hearing Wang Shuyao scream, Duan Yuming rushed out. Seeing Wang Shuyao being slapped to the ground by the large hand of a nascent soul cultivator, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. With a wave of his hand, the rainbow sword turned into a 7-colored rainbow and rushed towards the large hand. "Go!" A soft shout came from the cave. The large hand picked up from the ground again and clenched into a fist to hit the rainbow sword. Poof! The rainbow sword pierced the giant hand. The giant hand shook as if it was about to collapse. Just as the giant hand flashed with brilliance, another giant hand took the opportunity to pounce from the side, and with a slap easily covered Duan Yuming. Duan Yuming felt an unparalleled power of imprisonment. He had never thought that after scheming for so many years and following Zhu Qinghe for so many years, he would become the mantis in the end. What made his heart ache the most was that he had just confided in Wang Shuyao, and their relationship had just undergone a fundamental change, but his Wang Shuyao had already died in the hands of a nascent soul cultivator. God, why are you so unfair? Duan Yuming couldn't help but shout. The heavens are naturally fair. A tall and thin early nascent soul cultivator emerged from the cave. It was none other than the cultivator who had chased after Xiao Hua in the ink cloud black forest. The nascent soul cultivator sneered. "Do you know how many cultivators you've killed in the 3 kingdoms of cultivation? Although you've carefully chosen the cultivators you've killed, they are still cultivators of the 3 kingdoms of cultivation. How can we let you do whatever you want?" "Humph, don't talk so much with him. This guy is too cunning. We have searched for him many times but couldn't catch him. Now that he is here to catch a turtle in a jar, don't let him escape again." The other nascent soul cultivator's hand also flew into the air and firmly covered Duan Yuming. "How can you cultivators know the divine abilities of us sword cultivators?" Duan Yuming sneered and waved his hand. 8 sword balls flew into the air at the same time. At the same time, Duan Yuming opened his mouth and spat out a stream of life essence. In an instant, 8 streams of life essence rushed into the 8 sword balls. "Senior, don't let this guy control the sword balls." Zhu Qinghe shouted anxiously. "Let me slap him to death." The cultivator who covered Duan Yuming sneered and pressed his hand down. He wanted to slap Duan Yuming as if he wanted to slap Wang Shuyao to death. However, the 8 sword balls above Duan Yuming's head suddenly emitted a brilliant light. The 8 sword beams flew straight up and pierced through the big hand. With a loud boom, the nascent soul cultivator's big hand collapsed. Following the collapse of the nascent soul cultivator's big hand, the 8 sword beams also dimmed. At the same time, the other nascent soul cultivator roared, "Go!" The other big hand slapped down. Duan Yuming's eyes flashed with determination. Looking at the badly mutilated Wang Shuyao, he slapped his forehead. A faint light overflowed from the top of his head. However, just as this light appeared, the nascent soul cultivator's big hand had already slapped down. Duan Yuming was slapped under the big hand without any suspense. "Ha!" The nascent soul cultivator laughed and said, "The emissary always said that this sword cultivator is powerful. In I's opinion, he is only SOSO. Fellow Taoist, be careful." Before the nascent soul cultivator finished speaking, the other nascent soul cultivator hurriedly shouted. The nascent soul cultivator was startled. Under his big hand, the 9 sword beams flashed and actually rushed towards Qin Yi and Zhu Qinghe. What was special was that one of the sword beams actually landed on the rainbow sword that had just fallen to the ground. The rainbow sword also flew up and was actually only half a step slower than the other 8 sword beams. Senior. Chen Yi turned pale with fright and hurriedly shouted, "Don't be afraid." The 2 nascent soul cultivators who were already standing beside Chen Yi and Zhu Qinghe were extremely calm. They casually rubbed their hands together, and a few faint beams of light appeared in front of the 4 of them. Puff, puff, puff. A series of noises could be heard as the 9 sword beams pierced through the beams of light. However, the beams of light only flickered, and were unable to pierce through them. The 9 streaks of sword light seemed to be exhausted as they fell from the sky. However, just as they fell half an inch, the 8 streaks of sword light once again emitted extremely brilliant sword light. Like poisonous snakes that had their tails stepped on, they rushed towards the 2 nascent soul cultivators to bite them. When the 2 nascent soul cultivators saw this, their faces were filled with astonishment. Both of them reached out their hands at the same time, as if trying to capture the sword lights. However, the 8 sword lights only paused in midair for a moment before rushing back into their hands. Damn it! The tall and thin nascent soul cultivator was slightly angered. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of life essence. It transformed into a 1-foot square shield in front of him. 4 of the flying swords actually destroyed the shield and stopped in midair like a dead fish. This is bad, Senior. That rainbow sword. Just as the tall and thin cultivator snorted coldly, he heard Chen Yi scream. When he looked up, he didn't know when, but the rainbow sword had already flown more than 10 feet away from the ground. Still want to run? The tall and skinny cultivator slapped his forehead, and another large hand was about to appear. However, the rainbow sword suddenly emitted a terrifying blood-red light, and its speed suddenly increased. Before the large hand could appear, it had already rushed out of the cave. Chapter 2020. This is bad. The tall and skinny cultivator didn't think too much and flew out of the cave. Unfortunately, even though he was a nascent soul cultivator, his magic power and divine sense were restricted here. By the time he flew out of the cave, the rainbow sword had already disappeared. Clap, 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 clap. A few claps sounded beside the tall and skinny cultivator. A voice said, "Senior is indeed powerful. You easily killed 2 evil sword cultivators on the spot. This merit cannot go unnoticed. I will definitely report this matter to the Alliance Master." When the tall and skinny cultivator heard this, his eyes turned slightly and a smile appeared on his face. He said to the cultivator in camouflage who had just turned around, "I don't dare." This was all planned by the emissary. It was the emissary's amazing strategy. We only did our best. Hee, Senior is wrong. This was all planned by the Alliance Master. How could Junior dare to be greedy? The cultivator said with a smile. But the tall and skinny cultivator looked worriedly at the rainbow sword that disappeared into the distance. The emissary didn't seem to see the rainbow sword fly away. He pointed at the sword orb in the tall and skinny cultivator's hand and said, "Is that Li Xiaobai's sword orb?" "If I guessed correctly, it is Li Xiaobai's sword orb." The cultivator quickly replied. Duan Yuming also put it away and activated it. Its power is indeed powerful. At this moment, another nascent soul cultivator walked out with Zhu Qinghe and Chen Yi. He held another 4 sword orbs and a sword case in his hand and said, "We followed the emissary's plan and really found a place that sword cultivators covet. We didn't come here and didn't even touch the things inside for fear of arousing Duan Yuming and Wang Shuyao's suspicion. Therefore, this is the first time Martial Nephew Zhu came here. It is also the first time for us. And, to be able to set up the emissary's plan, it is all thanks to Martial Nephew Zhu. If he didn't find this place, Duan Yuming and Wang Shuyao might not have been fooled." That's right. Su Yen School's Zhu Qinghe and Burial Flower Manor's Chen Yi, this emissary will remember them. I will definitely report everyone's merit to the Alliance Master. The emissary nodded and said, "These sword orbs, how to deal with them?" The tall and skinny nascent soul cultivator said with a smile, "Why not let the emissary take them back? This thing can be considered a rare item." "Forget it. You've worked hard for so many years. How can I take away your hard work? You can split these 8 sword pellets among yourselves. The emissary waved his hand and took out a storage pouch. This is some reward. Although it's not much, it's still a small token of appreciation from the Alliance leader. I don't dare. The tall and skinny cultivator took it and then looked at the other nascent soul cultivator. The cultivator handed the sword case to the messenger and smiled. This is the flying sword of Taoist bright sword of the Changbai sect. I'm afraid it's not appropriate for us to take it, so please handle it yourself. Well, this thing is indeed a bit troublesome. Let I handle it. The emissary put the sword case into the storage bag and looked up at the cave with a smile. If it weren't for Zhu Qinghe, this emissary wouldn't have thought that Li Xiubai and Reverend Brightsword's flying swords were hidden here. It's really unexpected. Indeed, even I didn't really believe Martial Nephew Zhu that day either. The tall and skinny cultivator nodded. However, even if there's nothing, Martial Nephew Zhu has already done a great deed by being able to lure 2 sword cultivators here. Hee, not to mention killing 2 birds with 1 stone. The emissary said with a smile. I don't dare. Zhu Qinghe was very respectful at this time. Chen Yi also smiled apologetically and didn't dare to say more. Well, this matter is over. I also passed on the Alliance leader's message. All of you have to be careful. The emissary instructed again. Chen Yi's burial flower manor is going to move again. Yes, I'll follow the emissary's instructions. Chen Yi pursed her lips and smiled. My burial flower manor won't stay in one place for long. Good. The emissary clapped his hands and said, Let's go. We don't know who will come here next time. We also don't know if they will think that we cultivators killed 2 sword cultivators here. The tall and skinny nascent soul cultivator had a trace of a bitter smile on his face as he looked at the other nascent soul cultivator. 10 days later, on a foothill outside the ink-cloud black forest, the emissary watched Zhu Qinghe, Chen Yi, and the 2 nascent soul cultivators disappear. Only then did he turn around and fly in another direction. When there was no one around, he removed the Mimi. He saw an early Foundation establishment cultivator who was about 20 years old. He wore an ordinary Taoist robe and had delicate features and a scholarly face. It was the deputy sect leader Zhang Zhihao who was personally appointed by heavenly demon sect's Zhang Qingxiao. Originally, I wanted you to kill the 2 sword cultivators. But you actually let one of them escape. This is good. The sect leader's plan is even more perfect and absolutely flawless. Isn't this the heaven's plan to let I do it? Zhang Zhihao said to himself coldly. The sect leader's wisdom is unparalleled in this world. Dao sect, they are really stupid pigs. Soon after, Zhang Zhihao flew away in a grandiose manner. No one knew that such a soul-stirring thing had happened in the Ink-Xiao Black Forest. No one knew that Xiaohua had lost his life in the Ink-Xiao Black Forest. As for Zhang Zhihao, although he was one of Zhang Qingxiao's doppelgangers, Zhang Qingxiao now specialized in Dao techniques. For the sake of Zhang Zhihao's safety and secrecy, she did not keep in touch with him at all times like before and turned Zhang Zhihao's knowledge into her own knowledge. How did Zhang Qingxiao know that Xiaohua had died? Moreover, Zhu Qinghe did not mention the loss of Xie Zhiqian and Chang Yefeng, the Golden Core cultivators. Zhang Zhihao did not ask at all, let alone Xiaohua, the Foundation establishment cultivator. Even Chen Yi would never mention it again. Unfortunately, the matter was far from what they knew. Sometimes what they saw might not be the truth. When Xiaohua's figure fell into the brilliance, that incomparable sword light chopped down from his back. In the eyes of Zhu Qinghe and the others, Xiaohua was split into 2 halves. In the eyes of Zhu Qinghe and the others, perhaps because the sword light was too powerful and the sword edge was too sharp, there was no bloody light for a moment, nor was there the tragic sight of Xiaohua's body being split into 2 halves. In fact, Xiaohua's scream was really tragic. It was really from the horror in his heart. It was truly terrifying. It was even more horrifying than that day when his meridians were almost broken by the earth-type spiritual energy of heaven and earth. After all, this was a blow from a true nascent soul cultivator's flying sword. It was a blow that really killed Xiaohua. But when Xiaohua shouted and released his horror, he suddenly heard a "kacha" sound in his mind. The expected pain did not come. Instead, his vision blurred and his figure appeared in midair. Moreover, his figure rapidly fell down. "Ouch, my butt!" Xiaohua roared and jumped up from the ground. He touched his butt and scolded, "Who is so uncultured to put some needles on such soft grass? Don't you know that this soft grass is used for something else?" Immediately, Xiaohua quickly touched his body and even touched an extremely important place. He said to himself in bewilderment, "Damn it, this young master, is this not dead?" Then Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something. He quickly untied his Taoist robe and took out the voodoo puppet that was tied with a purple ribbon from his neck. However, the voodoo puppet had already been split into two halves. The corners of the voodoo puppet's mouth drooped again. Good heavens, this voodoo puppet is actually real. It's actually this powerful. Xiaohua opened his eyes wide and looked at the voodoo puppet that was split into two halves in disbelief. To be honest, when he was refining the voodoo puppet, he didn't really believe it. After all, this was witchcraft, not Taoist techniques. Moreover, it could substitute death. What kind of almighty ability was this? What a pity, now that the voodoo puppet has been destroyed, I'm afraid it has already been used 3 times. Xiaohua felt extremely regretful. He carefully put away the voodoo puppet and thought, witchcraft has such a heaven-defying effect, how can it be lost? Looks like this young master needs to properly search for it. These things that others don't know about are definitely useful in crucial moments of life and death. Today, if it wasn't for this voodoo puppet, this young master would have died here without anyone knowing. Sigh, what a pity for this young master's spiritual armor. Xiaohua took off the spiritual armor and carefully put it into his storage bag. He then took out the spiritual armor that Gantian Mountain gave him and put it on. He shook his shoulders left and right and said with a frown, "This spiritual armor, why is it so uncomfortable? I keep feeling that it smells like Qian Diheng's body odor." "Ah, done," Xiaohua said and raised his hands in the air. He let out a long breath and said, "The feeling of being alive is really good." Xiaohua said and lowered his head to look at the pile of bones on the grass. He sighed and said, "These bones probably all met the same fate as this young master. Unfortunately, different people have different endings. This young master's life is good." Following which, Xiaohua looked around and was shocked. He saw that this was a place filled with lush greenery. A layer of spiritual grass covered the ground. In the distance, there were a few tall trees with twisted branches. The lush green leaves on the trees rustled in the wind. A gurgling sound like that of a zither could be heard from the stream, causing Xiaohua's excited mood to calm down. Xiaohua raised his head again. Above his head was a sky blue color. It wasn't much different from the sky that he usually saw. Furthermore, above the sky blue, there were traces of white. It was extremely similar to the white clouds. Sigh, such a calm and peaceful place. After experiencing life and death, only then do I know that this is the most beautiful. Xiaohua sighed. Just as he was about to walk around and look around, he suddenly heard the sound of wading in the stream. He couldn't help but sweep out with his spiritual sense. As expected, in the stream, there was a little deer that looked like a lamb looking at him in fear. It seemed to be able to sense Xiaohua's spiritual sense and frantically walked around the stream. After running a few feet, it hurriedly went ashore and hid in the dense forest behind the stream. My spiritual sense can be used? Xiaohua suddenly understood. However, when he swept out with his spiritual sense again, in the dense forest behind the stream, apart from trees, there were only trees. The little deer was nowhere to be found. Chapter 2021. Strange. Xiaohua found it strange. He blinked his eyes and thought for a moment, but he still temporarily extinguished the thought of going forward to investigate. Anyone who had just been killed once would be more careful, knowing the principle of curiosity killing the cat. This young master should do some good deeds first. Xiaohua looked around, walked to the side of the stream, and used the great wisdom heavy sword to dig a large hole. Then, he turned around and cleaned up the large pile of bones into the large hole. After he had filled up the hole, he said, "What a pity, not a single person's storage pouch was left behind. Could it be that there were also people who came here? Also had the same luck as this young master?" This sentence directly exposed Xiaohua's nature, but it wasn't that he didn't gain anything. There was a plum blossom-like token among the bones. This token was very strange. Xiaohua couldn't see what material it was made of, and his divine sense couldn't penetrate it. It was probably carried by some cultivator. Xiaohua couldn't see any clues, and casually put it into his storage pouch. But suddenly, Xiaohua quivered again, and an excited expression appeared on his face. Yes, needless to say, if the storage pouches of these bones were all here, then it meant that there was only one passage in this space, and that was the dead end that Xiaohua came in. Without being killed by the flying sword, it was impossible to enter. But what if the storage pouches were all gone? That meant that there were living people who came in. Xiaohua didn't believe that someone could come in alive under the flying sword and not take away the flying sword and sword pellet. This also meant that, other than the dead end above Xiaohua's head, there were other ways to survive in this space. Someone came in and out of that way, and took away all the storage pouches. But this young master fell from the 3rd floor, so this should be the 4th floor, right? Why is it somewhat different from the 4th floor that Taoist master Lu Peng described? There doesn't seem to be any cold pond here. Xiaohua scratched his head, somewhat bewildered. Forget it, let's not care about that for now. This young master should first find a way out. Xiaohua released his divine sense. This divine sense was also restricted here, but fortunately, it could still be released for dozens of zhang, so it was better than nothing. However, even if this young master finds a way out, this young master can't go out now. Zhu Qinghe and the rest were 4 golden core cultivators. They were definitely not something that yours truly could deal with alone. Motherfucker, this bitch Chen Yi looks incomparably pure, but not only is she extremely stingy, her heart is also vicious. That bamboo marrow of the jade orchid bamboo. I'm afraid this bitch has long since had the intention to kill me. Could it be in the Buried Flowers Manor? Or was it in Mo Zhao Black Forest? Forget it, I won't bother guessing anymore. I can't guess the thoughts of a female cultivator even if I guess. I might as well use my own means to see who's the real deal. Xiaohua's eyes flashed with a hint of sternness. He hated people who schemed against him the most, especially cultivators with higher cultivation than him. No wonder someone wanted to poison Chen Yi's spirit grass. Damn it, it would be better if all the youth-retaining grass died out. Sun Qian, although she's only known by name, she's definitely an interesting female cultivator. Xiaohua became more and more angry. He suddenly felt grateful to Sun Qian, who he had never met before. He felt a kind of sympathy in his heart. If there's a chance, this young master will go to the Buried Flowers Manor and make a scene. After finishing his good deed, Xiaohua released his divine sense again and carefully examined the spirit grass under his feet. Unfortunately, after looking for a long time, there was only a common spirit grass under his feet. It wasn't rare, but no matter how long this spirit grass grew, it was only half a foot long. It was most suitable for some decorations, so many cultivators casually planted it in their immortal's cave. However, Xiaohua still had a heart that would rather miss it than let it go. He still transplanted a large piece of spirit grass into his space. Then, after seeing that there was nothing strange around him, he lifted his feet and walked to the side of the small stream. The stream could only submerge his feet. It wasn't very deep, but it was abnormally cold and very bone-chilling. Admittedly, this place didn't restrict divine sense, but Xiaohua's Jinyuan was still condensed and couldn't mobilize his magic power. Xiaohua had to personally wade through the stream. However, when Xiaohua sat beside the stream and took off his shoes and socks, he suddenly had a rare kind of joy. It seemed that a childlike feeling that he hadn't experienced for a long time spontaneously arose. It also seemed that he often did this kind of carefree and unrestrained thing many years ago. This kind of rare mood made Xiaohua walk along the stream for a while until there was a kind of pain on his feet. Only then did he reluctantly go ashore. Cultivators, perhaps, have heaven-defying magical powers, but when using these magical powers, they throw away a lot of fun. I really don't know if it's right or wrong. Xiaohua suddenly remembered that when he was in Tianmen Mountain, Huang Tianle told him to often use his feet to walk. At this time, he was quite emotional. Walking ashore, it was still a grassland, but there were many more trees. These trees were named after Xiaohua's footsteps, so he naturally didn't hold back. He pulled out a few different kinds of trees and sent them into his space. Who told Xiaohua to have so much strength? Even if he didn't have magic power, pulling out these thick trees from the ground was an extremely easy matter. The forest was more than 10 times larger than the grassland on the other side of the stream. However, when Xiaohua walked to the end, he saw a rugged and hard stone wall. He still didn't see any deer. Even the open space near the stone wall that didn't have any trees planted was only covered with green grass. What's going on here? Xiaohua turned his eyes. When he asked himself this question, he actually already had an answer in his heart. Immediately, he stretched out his left hand without hesitation and opened his transcendence vision, carefully sizing up this stone wall. When he finished looking at all the places on the stone wall, he unconsciously used his hand to scratch his chin thoughtfully. The stone wall wasn't similar to what Xiaohua had seen before. Previously, when Xiaohua saw it, he could directly see through the restriction, and even a hole appeared in his transcendence vision. However, this stone wall wasn't the hole he expected, but 9 different stars. Strange. Xiaohua stared at these stars for a long time, but still couldn't figure out what they meant. Soon after, he had no choice but to wade through the stream and arrive at the grassland he was at before. He wanted to find a similar stone wall on the grassland. However, what was even more unexpected was that this side of the grassland was even more extreme. There wasn't even a stone wall, only a restriction that divine sense couldn't see through, blocking him. After walking along the restriction for a while, Xiaohua gave up. He didn't know how big this space was, but he knew that there wasn't only shrinking Earth into an inch, there was also so close yet worlds apart. If there was such a magic at the edge of the restriction, he wouldn't be able to find the end even if he walked for 10,000 years. When Xiaohua returned to the grassland, he once again sat at the place he had just landed. He propped up his chin and looked straight up, as if waiting for Xie Zhiqian or Chang Yefeng to fall from above. Chapter 2022. After a full meal, Xiaohua finally stopped his illusion of waiting for the rabbit. He stretched and lay on the grass, crossing his arms behind his head and using his head as a pillow. He even closed his eyes, looking like he was taking a break. However, in just a moment, Xiaohua thought of something and suddenly jumped up from the ground. He patted his forehead and took out a sword pill from his Buddha's heart. He looked at it again and again. Damn it, I knew it. Those 9 stars looked very familiar. It turns out that they look similar to my 9 sword pills. Xiaohua happily ran to the stone wall and took out the other 8 sword pills, using his Dharma eyes to deal with them one by one. Sure enough, the 9 sword pills Xiaohua got from the Thunderquake Palace matched the shape of the 9 stars. Since this young master's 9 sword pills matched the 9 stars, then what is Zhu Chenghe's sword pill? Thinking, Xiaohua also took out Zhu Chenghe's sword pill and compared it slightly. It was actually extremely similar to one of Xiaohua's sword pills. Strange. Xiaohua scratched his head. Could it be that this is the authentic one? Of course, Zhu Chenghe's sword pill was said to be obtained from the first floor here, and Xiaohua's 9 sword pills were completely unrelated. Xiaohua naturally didn't dare to be sure. Whether it's a mule or a horse, I have to take it out for a walk. Xiaohua thought and spread out his hand. The sword pill was sent to the stone wall, near the star that was similar in size to the sword pill. As Xiaohua expected, a strange thing happened. The star emitted a faint brilliance, and a light belt with the same outline as the star penetrated the stone wall and covered the sword pill. Naturally, this was what Xiaohua saw with his Dharma eyes. He couldn't see it with his naked eyes or divine sense. Just as Xiaohua was rejoicing, the brilliance circled around the sword pill and turned back. The entire star and even the stone wall didn't change at all. But could it be that this is a mule? Xiaohua looked at the sword pellet and put it into his storage pouch. Soon after, he took out his own tattered sword pellet, and the same brilliance covered the sword pellet. What surprised Xiaohua was that at the same time, a huge force was suddenly born from the star. Without waiting for him to wake up, his sword pellet merged with the stone wall, and even merged with the star. Great! Xiaohua was shocked at first, then he was overjoyed. This meant that his 9 sword pellets were the real 9 stars transit, and Zhu Qinghe's sword pellets were just fakes. Since Zhu Qinghe's sword pill is a fake, then, Xiaohua suddenly remembered, the 8 sword pills above are all fake. Then what about the flying swords inside the sword sheath? Wasn't it even more fake? But since it's fake, why is it so fierce? Xiaohua was somewhat unable to understand, but then Xiaohua laughed involuntarily. His grandmother, this young master doesn't care if the information above is real or fake. This young master was scared to death by that flying sword. Isn't this coming here to compensate this young master? I'm sure the 4 people on the upper level are holding 8 fake sword pellets and are so happy that they don't even know where they're going. Following Xiaohua's small tail, Xiaohua placed the other 7 sword pellets into the stars. But when Xiaohua spat out Zhu Meng, he saw Zhu Meng nimbly shrink and shrink in Xiaohua's palm. No matter what Xiaohua did, he was unable to restore Zhu Meng to the appearance of a sword pellet. His grandmother, this young master didn't work hard for nothing, right? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled, but he still unwillingly sent Zhu Meng to the stone wall. Something that made Xiaohua happy happened again. Under the brilliance, the small sword actually escaped from Xiaohua's palm and drilled into the last star. Great! Xiaohua didn't even have time to cheer when he heard a rumbling sound coming from the stone wall. It was as if the stone wall was about to be completely pushed open. The 9 stars in the stone wall emitted a bright brilliance and began to rapidly rotate. The rotation trajectory was very strange, and as it rotated, a fiery red brilliance gradually formed within the 9 stars. Xiaohua opened his Dharma eyes wide. He wasn't looking at the fiery red brilliance, but the rotation trajectory of the 9 stars. He had practiced sword play the world for a long time and had some attainments in sword formations. At this moment, with just a few glances, he immediately understood that the rotation of the 9 stars was a profound sword formation technique. Xiaohua looked while desperately memorizing. When all the 9 stars stopped, Xiaohua finally finished looking at the entire sword formation. When Xiaohua closed his Dharma eyes, he carefully recalled the sword formation's trajectory in his mind. Only when he was sure that he had completely memorized it did he want to open his eyes. However, before he could even open his eyes, something cold and wet licked his eyes. Red dawn. Xiaohua's first reaction was fairy red dawn, but when he opened his eyes, in front of him was actually the small deer he saw just now. Ah? Xiaohua looked at the small deer that was abnormally panicked and abnormally intimate. He smiled and used his hand to push the small deer's head to the side. But this deer was different from others. Xiaohua didn't feel any warmth when he touched it, only a kind of coldness and a kind of sharpness. And this small deer is probably the brilliance that appeared under the 9 stars illumination just now. Or maybe it came out from this cave. Xiaohua was a little enlightened. He saw that a cave entrance that was about the height of a person had appeared in the 9 stars. It led to the stone wall, and within that cave, there was a faint brilliance that seeped out. Where's my sword pill? Where's my dream executioner? Xiaohua hurriedly looked at the 9 stars. Unfortunately, the 9 stars were still located in the stone wall, and his divine sense and eyes couldn't see them. Xiaohua slightly activated the sword art. Although he couldn't really use it, Xiaohua could faintly sense that the dream executioner was currently in the cave. Should I go in or not? Xiaohua was a little hesitant, but as if it knew Xiaohua's hesitation, the small deer actually stretched out its head, bit his Taoist robe, and pulled him in. Seeing such a clever small deer, Xiaohua smiled. The timid small deer wasn't afraid of what was inside, so he didn't have to worry about anything. After approaching the cave, Xiaohua immediately felt an extremely pure heaven-earth spiritual qi. It was far from being comparable to the cave he had just entered. However, when he turned a corner and came face to face with a space that was the same size as the upper level, Xiaohua was dumbfounded. In that space, there was a large stone that was exactly the same as the upper level. At this time, there were also 8 sword pills and a sword case. However, the only difference on the stone was that the dream executioner was also placed there flat like an ordinary flying sword. Looking at the 2 sides of the stone, there were 2 cultivators sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed. One was dressed as a sword cultivator, the other was dressed as a Taoist cultivator. What else was there to say? Xiaohua was shocked and didn't dare to use his divine sense to scan. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Junior Xiaohua greets Senior Li Xiubai and Taoist Bright Sword." However, after waiting for a long time, he didn't hear anyone speak. Only then did Xiaohua secretly scan the 2 with his divine sense. However, in his divine sense, how were they 2 people? They were simply 2 incomparably sharp swords that could directly cut through Xiaohua's divine sense. Are these 2 people alive or dead? Xiaohua smiled bitterly. He knew that cultivators were incomparably powerful and could cut off one's life force. It was common for cultivators to come back from the brink of death. However, based on the appearance of these 2 people, he couldn't be sure at all. However, Xiaohua immediately thought of what Xuqing has said. Li Xiubai and Taoist Bright Sword's Life Sword Tablet and Life Spirit Tablet were already damaged. How could the 2 of them still be alive? Seniors, I heard that the 2 of you have already immortalized. Junior had no choice but to intrude. Please forgive me. Xiaohua bowed again. This is the sword pill that Junior obtained. Moreover, Junior has already refined it. Junior still wants to take back the execution dream. Oh, of course, Junior's ability is limited for the other 8 sword pills and can't refine them. If Senior wants to take them back, Junior has no objections. As he spoke, Xiaohua waved his hand and wanted to take back the execution dream. However, the execution dream seemed to be extremely heavy and couldn't be picked up. Xiaohua sighed and walked to the front of the rock. He looked at the sword sheath and then looked at Zhu Meng, pondering how to pick up Zhu Meng. At this moment, the obedient little deer leaped past Xiaohua and jumped into the sword sheath with a light jump. This little deer. Xiaohua was somewhat dumbfounded. He only knew a little about sword cultivators. All of his flying swords were trained in Sword Plays the World. He didn't know anything about the flying sword techniques of the Changbai sect. This little deer is the sword spirit of Taoist Bright Sword's flying sword? How can a cultivator's flying sword have a sword spirit? Is a sword spirit this mysterious? Xiaohua raised his Dharma eye and looked at the sword case. Inside the sword case was a fiery red little deer lying down. It was extremely quiet and didn't seem to be dangerous. However, once bitten by a snake, twice shy. Xiaohua had just been killed by the sword case. He couldn't make the same mistake again. After thinking for a long time, when his gaze fell on the cultivators sitting on both sides of the stone, he couldn't help but smile. Of course, if there was a problem with the sword case, he could escape. These 2, wouldn't they also be affected? This physical body, wouldn't it be even more dangerous? Thinking this, Xiaohua still chose a more ingenious angle. If there was a problem with the sword case, he could immediately hide behind Li Xiubai. Xiaohua was much more careful, but when he opened the sword case, there was no abnormality at all. He only saw an extremely ordinary flying sword lying quietly inside the sword case. That kind of silence was really like a shy little deer. Xiaohua was shocked because this flying sword looked exactly like the one that killed him on the 3rd floor. How could there be 2 identical flying swords? Taoist Bright Sword had 2 flying swords? Xiaohua gently took out the flying sword. On the cold sword hilt, there was a faint aura of the little deer. It was quite dependent on Xiaohua. At this time, Xiaohua felt that the dream executioner seemed to be able to move. Xiaohua didn't hesitate. He raised his hand and the dream executioner answered. Xiaohua didn't hesitate again and immediately sent the dream executioner into the Buddha's heart. Chapter 2023. After receiving the Dream Slayer, Xiaohua's heart calmed down. He used his index finger to touch the other sword orb. The sword orb rotated with his finger on the big rock, and the somewhat healed crack flashed left and right. Senior Li Xiubai. Xiao Hua said shyly, "This sword orb of yours, this little one has nurtured it for many years. Senior, take a look, it's almost repaired. If I leave the sword orb here, it can't be repaired completely. Senior, you don't want this little one to give up halfway, right? This little one feels that this sword orb should be left here with this little one. Wait for this little one to properly repair it, and wait for it to shine in the future. And, since you don't object, this little one will take it as your consent." Thus, Xiaohua didn't see Li Xiubai's objection and put the sword orb into his Buddha heart like lightning. Soon after, Xiaohua scratched his head, touched his nose with his finger, and said, "Senior, you seem to be an easy person to talk to, and you don't want your sword orb to be misused. How about this? Since this little one has already received 2 sword orbs, you might as well give this little one the 9 stars transit of the sun N. It's still the same old rule. If you don't say anything, this little one will take it as your consent." And just like this, Xiaohua took back the 8 sword orbs and put them into his Buddha heart. Soon after, Xiaohua looked at the flying sword in his hand, somewhat embarrassed. This flying sword belonged to Reverend Bright Sword, and it was also Changbai Sex. If he took it out, he was afraid that it would cause trouble. Moreover, he already had the 9 stars transit of the sun flying sword, so Reverend Bright Sword's flying sword was probably useless. However, when Xiaohua put the sword case on the rock, the little deer jumped out of the sword case and licked Xiaohua's hand, as if it was begging Xiaohua to take it away. Xiaohua touched the little deer's ice-cold head and pondered. But at this moment, the little deer bit Xiaohua's Taoist robe and led Xiaohua to the other side of the big rock. Its small tongue licked a bulge on the big rock. The strange thing was, following the little deer's actions, the bulge actually slowly disappeared, revealing a small jade slip. It's really strange. Xiaohua knew that this little deer should be the key to discovering this jade slip. If the little deer didn't want to, perhaps no one would be able to find this jade slip. Taking the jade slip from the little deer's mouth, Xiaohua used his hand to touch the little deer's forehead, indicating that it should wait a moment, and then his divine sense of the jade slip. Xiaohua's expression changed a few times. First, he suddenly understood, then he showed respect, then he was overjoyed. In the end, he was actually wild with joy. Of course, in the end, his brows were tightly knitted, as if he had encountered something difficult to decide. After completely reading the jade slip, Xiaohua carefully put the jade slip into the space and patted the little deer's head, indicating that it should return to the flying sword. Soon after, Xiaohua waved his hand and the flying sword returned to his hand. Only then did he straighten his clothes and salute Li Xiubai and Taoist Master Bright Sword again, saying, "This junior has disturbed the 2 seniors." The 2 seniors' determination and confidence in pursuing the way of the sword, as well as their noble character and unquestionable integrity, this junior admires them. Today, this junior will take away the sword pellet and flying sword. In the future, no one will disturb the 2 seniors. Quiet cultivation. Soon after, Xiaohua saluted the 2 9 times, slowly sweeping his eyes over the entire space, and slowly retreated from the space. Following his retreat, the entire cave rumbled and gradually closed, gradually shrinking, and completely disappearing from the stone wall. Only when the cave completely disappeared did Xiaohua put the flying sword into the space with a flick of his sleeve. Soon after, Xiaohua didn't go far. He sat in front of the stone wall and carefully recalled what he had just seen. It turned out that what was recorded in the jade slip was the friendship between Li Xiubai and Taoist Master Bright Sword, the 2's determination to pursue the way of the sword, and the 2's helplessness when they were forced to duel. Just as the legend said, Taoist Master Bright Sword went to Huan country to challenge the sword cultivators. Although it was for the way of the sword and for his own realm, it was more for the prestige of the Changbai sect and for the benefit of his sect. In fact, according to Taoist Master Bright Sword's thoughts, he could have quietly gone and found a few sword cultivators with similar cultivation to himself. Wouldn't it have been better if they discussed the sword in the morning and wine in the evening? Who would have thought that as soon as he left the Changbai sect, the eyes of the 3 cultivation countries were focused on him. The sword cultivators of Huan country also looked at him with vigilant and threatening gazes. They simply treated his so-called friendliness as a trap. When Taoist Master Bright Sword saw that his goodwill was fruitless, he could only brandish his flying sword and fight head-on. Of course, Taoist Master Bright Sword's attainments in the flying sword far exceeded the expectations of the sword cultivators of Huan country. It was normal for him to be easily defeated by Taoist Master Bright Sword. That challenge could not be considered a success. First, Taoist Master Bright Sword's state of mind was not there and the results were limited. Second, the sword cultivator he wanted to challenge, Li Xiubai, was not in the Flame Bamboo Sword sect. When Taoist Master Bright Sword returned to the Changbai sect and went into seclusion, Li Xiubai chased after him. Similar to Taoist Master Bright Sword's situation, Li Xiubai also had a mission. His mission was even more important than Taoist Master Bright Sword's. He had to redeem the reputation of the sword cultivators of Huan country. However, when he saw Taoist Master Bright Sword's refined and courteous manner at the Changbai sect and talked with him in detail, Li Xiubai knew that although this cultivator in front of him was from the Tao sect, he was like him, a fanatic who pursued the way of the sword. However, this was the cultivation world, the Dawn Rain continent where the way of the sword and the way of the sword were on par. They could not work together to comprehend and improve together. Moreover, all the sword cultivators and the entire Tao sect were waiting for this rare flying sword duel. It was impossible for them to not give the Changbai sect, the Flame Bamboo Sword sect, and the entire Dawn Rain continent an explanation. The two fell into a difficult situation. Just as Taoist Master Bright Sword said in the Jade Slip, "I originally thought that if I cultivated a small divine ability, I would be free to roam the Dawn Rain continent. If I cultivated a great divine ability, I would be free to roam the three realms." However, the cultivation world is like the mortal world. There is face, honor, and many awkwardness that one has no choice but to do. Now, I understand that I am not wrong to be obsessed with the way of the sword. I am not wrong to pursue the way of the sword. I am wrong to be in the limelight. I am wrong to place the glory of the sect on myself. If I was given a chance, I would hide the sword in my heart and hide the blade. Before I could break free from the shackles of the sect, I would just be an ordinary free disciple. In the half a year at the Changbai sect, Taoist Master Bright Sword and Li Xiubai completely let go of their misgivings and let go of the barrier between the Tao sect and the sword cultivators. They discussed the way of the sword together and discussed what they had learned. They even learned from each other's strengths to make up for their weaknesses. They had made great progress in many areas of the way of the sword. However, as the relationship between the two grew, the pressure they faced also increased. The Changbai sect master had already given the order to have a winner or loser no matter what. This caused the two of them to be in an extremely difficult position. Chapter 2024. Of course, the two could also join hands to create a scam and deceive the world. However, both of them were experts in the way of the sword and would rather break than bend. They knew that if they did this, their way of the sword would be tarnished and their state of mind would also be tainted. In the future, their way of the sword would not have any progress. Rather than that, they might as well have a real duel. Thus, Reverend Bright Sword and Li Xiubai made a promise to the world. However, after half a year of sparring, Reverend Bright Sword and Li Xiubai were clear that the flying swords of sword cultivators and the flying swords of Taoist sects each had their own merits. In ordinary places, even if they could distinguish who was better, it would be due to the difference in magic power, magic tools, and even swords. It would not be able to distinguish who was better in the way of the sword. Only by discarding these factors could one truly determine who was better in the way of the sword. Thus, Reverend Bright Sword chose a place like the Inkzhao Black Forest that restricted spiritual sense and magic power. At the same time, the two of them also considered each other. They only agreed to allow the Changbai sect and Yanzhu Sword sect to fight, but they would definitely not announce the result of the duel to the world. The result of the battle was basically within Taoist Master Bright Sword's and Li Xiubai's expectations. The difference in cultivation between the two was too minuscule. It could only end in mutual destruction. And this mutual destruction attack was launched by both of them at the same time without any hesitation. They did not hold back in the slightest. They were truly dying for the Tao of the sword. This was also the reason why Xiao Hua bowed 9 times to the corpses of the 2 people in the end. Xiao Hua asked himself if he would sacrifice himself for something, but he admired these seniors who sacrificed themselves for their own pursuits from the bottom of his heart. After that sword, Li Xiubai died. However, because Reverend Brightsword had a yuanying, he did not immediately die. First, he set up a deceptive formation in the cave on the 3rd floor to prevent covetous people from destroying their bodies. Then he activated the formation he had set up in advance in the cave on the 4th floor and wrote down a jade slip before he died safely. In the jade slip, other than recording the real situation of Li Xiubai and Reverend Brightsword's interaction and duel, it also explained the deceptive array in the 3rd and 4th floor. Of the 2 flying swords of Reverend Brightsword on the 3rd and 4th floors, only the 3rd floor was real. Inside the flying sword was an array laid down by Reverend Brightsword. On the 4th floor, the flying sword that Xiao Hua had obtained was not used by Reverend Brightsword. However, the flying sword that Xiao Hua obtained was the true essence of Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. In other words, it was the sword intent of Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The sword intent was different from the sword spirit. It was a realm of pure sword Tao, a height of comprehension of the sword Tao. This sword intent was sealed within this ordinary flying sword by Reverend Brightsword. Seeing this, Xiao Hua really did frown, because he thought that the little deer should be the sword spirit of the flying sword, but he didn't expect that the little deer was actually a sword intent that could kill everything. Look at Xiaolu's shy and timid appearance. How was it related to sword intent at all? Taoist Brightsword's treatment of Li Xiubai's 9 sword pellets was different. The 8 sword pellets placed in the 3rd level were fake, but the sword spirits inside were real. However, the sword spirits were damaged during the battle. The 9th sword pellet, which was the one that Xiao Hua obtained from Zhu Qinghe, was thrown out of the valley by Reverend Brightsword. As for the real 9 sword pellets and the sword intent within them, Reverend Brightsword hesitated for a long time because it involved the 2's physical bodies and even the inheritance of the sword Tao. In the end, he still threw the sword pellets in the 4th level. He still wanted to pass down the sword Tao that he and Li Xiubai had comprehended. As for the sword Tao that Li Xiubai and Reverend Brightsword had comprehended, it was also explained in the jade slip. The real sword intent was their comprehension. If a fated person obtained the sword intent, they would be able to obtain their comprehension from the sword intent and receive their inheritance. Of course, the comprehension that couldn't be included in the sword intent was also recorded in the jade slip. This was also the content that made Xiao Hua wild with joy. This part talked about Reverend Brightsword's unique comprehension, as well as Li Xiubai's repair of this comprehension. This was the secret of using the primordial spirit to control the sword. Sword cultivators used the sword as their foundation and used their own body to nurture a sword spirit, achieving the goal of controlling the sword with their own body. This was known to all cultivators in the world. However, the sword spirit was the sword pellet spirit. It was a unique secret technique used by various sword sects to temper their sword pellets. Sword cultivators used their own blood and sweat to nurture the sword spirit, allowing the sword spirit to be used by them. After hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of years of communication, they could become one with the sword spirit, becoming one with the sword spirit. Reverend Brightsword blazed a new path and thought of using a wisp of his primordial spirit to fuse with a flying sword, using his primordial spirit to control the sword. It wasn't that no Tao sect cultivators had thought of this method since ancient times, but Reverend Brightsword had used his own unique method to realize it. He had even succeeded. He had used his primordial spirit to defeat the sword cultivators' sword spirit flying sword one by one. In the jade slip, Reverend Brightsword had recorded a secret technique to nurture and strengthen the primordial spirit. This was what Li Xiubai had comprehended. Li Xiubai had also relied on this secret technique to obtain the reputation of a sword immortal. This secret technique of sword heart seed that had been perfected by Reverend Brightsword and Li Xiaobai was admittedly a secret path to cultivating the flying sword in the eyes of sword cultivators. However, in Xiaohua's eyes, how could it merely be a path to cultivating the flying sword? He had the ghost cultivator's secret technique to divide his primordial spirit into tens of thousands, as well as the devil cultivator's blood shadow technique. The reason why he hadn't dared to split his primordial spirit was because he didn't have the secret technique to strengthen his primordial spirit. He was afraid that after splitting his primordial spirit, he wouldn't be able to distinguish between the primary and secondary primordial spirit, and his true primary primordial spirit would be devoured by the other primordial spirits. Now, Reverend Brightsword was actually able to split a wisp of his primordial spirit and fuse it with the flying sword. This secret technique was admittedly somewhat crude in Xiaohua's eyes, and was even extremely dangerous. However, his method was correct, and his technique was absolutely heaven-defying. This method could be said to complement the ghost cultivator's spirit-splitting technique, and could be used as a reference. Li Xiaobai's secret technique could also be used as a reference with the blood shadow technique's secret technique. Apart from strengthening the primordial spirit, it could also control the primordial spirit. This was exactly what Xiaohua urgently needed to cultivate. How could Xiaohua not be wild with joy? Xiaohua sat cross-legged on the grass in front of the stone wall for a long time. After thinking about all the details, he sighed and said, "Two seniors, this junior has benefited greatly from your sword Dao and comprehension. This junior doesn't know how to repay you, but looking at the two seniors' intentions, they didn't intend to leave this thing for the Flame Bamboo Sword sect and the Changbai sect. Therefore, this junior won't give this thing to them. After this junior practices it, I will definitely choose someone with a noble character like the two seniors to teach, and pass down the two seniors' orthodoxy. This sword sect must be a new sword sect. It doesn't belong to sword cultivators, nor does it belong to the Dao sect's sword sect. Senior Sword Heart Seed will definitely make this sword sect famous throughout the world." Thinking of this, Xiaohua suddenly quivered, as if he had thought of something. He looked at the empty stone wall with an inconceivable gaze. His gaze seemed to be able to see through the stone wall and into the stone cave, looking at the two sword-like bodies of Li Xiaobai and Reverend Brightsword. Yes, a sword Dao expert who could split his primordial spirit and plant it into a flying sword, even if his cultivation was restricted, could he easily achieve heaven incarnation? However, Xiaohua immediately withdrew his gaze and said with a smile, "This doesn't seem to have anything to do with this junior, right? As long as this junior takes advantage of it, won't he be stronger than anyone else? Forget it, this junior should quickly find a way out and return. I'm afraid that Haoming City's Xue Xue is waiting anxiously, right? Since Reverend Brightsword has left the way out in the Jade Slip, this junior." Xiaohua smiled and turned around to leave. However, after taking 2 steps, he was stunned again. "Damn it, Senior Brightsword, how can you speak without bringing me along? Why did you only talk about the path from the 3rd layer to the 2nd layer, and the path from the 2nd layer to the 1st layer? Why didn't you talk about the path from the 4th layer to the 3rd layer?" Xiaohua was about to stomp his feet. However, when Xiaohua took out the jade slip again and looked at it again and again, there was still no record. He was somewhat scratching his head. Since Reverend Brightsword didn't record it, then, there must be a reason. He couldn't have left a useless jade slip, right? Even if this junior successfully cultivates the flying sword, how will he go out? How will he let someone pass on this flying sword technique? Xiaohua muttered to himself. Then he looked around carefully. This stone wall can be climbed? This restriction can be broken? The stream water. I'm such a big fool. Xiaohua slapped his head and said self-deprecatingly, "Since there is water flowing in and out, it means that there is an entrance and an exit here. If water can enter and exit, then this junior can also enter and exit." Thinking about this, Xiaohua was about to jump into the stream water and walk up, but at this moment, Xiaohua smiled bitterly again. Damn it, this junior was really knocked out by Reverend Brightsword's flying sword. The cold pool that Reverend Lu Peng mentioned, isn't it where this stream flows into? If this junior follows the direction of the stream water, won't I be able to find the cold pool? Senior Bright Sword, your sword strike was really too vicious. Your Dao can be considered as compensation for this junior. Xiaohua really couldn't figure out why he didn't connect to the cold pool because of the stream water. If he really did connect like that, he feared that he wouldn't be able to obtain the true sword intent, right? Sure enough, following the flow of the stream, after Xiaohua walked for the time it took to eat a meal, he found a gap that was only the size of a palm in one of the restrictions. This gap was clearly set up for the stream. No matter how Xiaohua struck it with the Great Wisdom Sword, it would not expand in the slightest. Admittedly, Xiaohua could try to use the spiritual fire, but did Xiaohua need to spend so much effort? He only thought for a moment and put all of his storage pouches and other things into the space. He used a simple secret technique to pass through this flaw that was extremely difficult for other cultivators. However, just as he passed through the hole in the restriction, a huge force pressed down on Xiaohua's body from above. All of the true essence in his body completely condensed. It was a kind of condensation that Xiaohua had never experienced before. Xiaohua's entire body rushed out from the hole. Following that ice-cold stream, he fell from midair. Unfortunately, just as he had time to shout, he heard a plop sound as Xiaohua fell into a deep pool. Chapter 2025. There was a huge pressure in the space, and Xiaohua couldn't use any of his magic power. He was like a mortal. When he fell into the deep pool, he struggled with all his might. Fortunately, Xiaohua knew how to swim, and the buoyancy of the water was strong enough. Xiaohua flopped and flopped to the shore of the deep pool. Xiaohua powerlessly struggled out of the pool and let out a breath. He lay on the side of the deep pool, not wanting to move at all. The pressure in this space is too great, right? Xiaohua looked up at the sky in admiration. It was pitch black above, as if he was at the bottom of the mountain in the Inkzhao Black Forest. Xiaohua's gaze swept over the cliff he just fell on, and his eyes flashed with joy. He bent his waist and sat up. Xiaohua used a lot of strength to do such a simple action. What Xiaohua saw was an enormous, incomparably dark stone wall. The other two walls were the same. On the stone wall, there were dozens of holes of different sizes. Each hole had a different size of water flowing into the cold pond. Damn it, could it be that behind each water flow is a space? Then, isn't each space the same as the one I just went to? Xiaohua couldn't help but be flabbergasted. Xiaohua stood up with difficulty and roughly sized up this space. He couldn't help but smile. It turned out that this was a rather large space. There was only one huge cold pool, and it almost occupied the entire space. Wasn't it exactly as Immortal Lu Peng described? So, this is the space that Immortal Lu Peng went to. Xiaohua suddenly realized. It seems that the fourth layer is definitely not one space. It's multiple. Since Immortal Lu Peng went in and out, Xiaohua was relieved. There must be a way out here. However, Xiaohua looked at the deep pool in front of him and the source of the stream behind it. He understood that it was easy to come out from the stream, but it would be extremely difficult to go back. Since there was no obvious way out of the deep pool, Xiaohua turned his gaze to the slightly steep slope behind him. Contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, the high slope was actually a rock wall. It was a sealed rock wall without a single crack. Even if Xiaohua used his hands to touch every place he could reach, he still couldn't find any way out. Xiaohua was a little anxious. He took out the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword and the Devil Hammer, and used brute force to knock on the rock wall. However, there was no effect. The rock wall seemed to be cast from copper and iron, and it was not damaged in the slightest. Xiaohua frowned. There was nothing he could do, so he slowly walked towards the pool and released his divine sense. At this moment, although his divine sense was still able to leave his body, it could only extend for about 3 meters, which was not even comparable to the vision of the naked eye. Arriving at the left side of the deep pool, Xiaohua stretched out his body and squinted his eyes as he looked down into the deep pool. However, he saw that in the dark shadows, behind a protruding rock wall, there was a palm-sized place. It really couldn't be sensed by divine sense. My goodness, Who would care about such a remote place? How did Taoist Master Lu Peng notice that place back then? Could it be? Xiaohua rubbed his chin as he looked at the deep pool. He was really imagining things. In the end, Xiaohua ended his association with cultivators are also people, and began to think about how to get this thing out. Then, he looked at the location of the cliff, blinked his eyes a few times, and very naturally opened his illusion breaker eyes. After using the illusion breaker eyes several times, Xiaohua felt that it was really convenient to have this illusion breaker eyes. This thing is really strange. What Xiaohua saw with his illusion breaker eyes, the thing that couldn't be sensed by divine sense, was actually in the shape of a spindle. It was embedded in the rock wall, and it was more than 3 meters long and more than 1 qi wide. Xiaohua understood that what the illusion breaker eyes saw was condensed from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It was even an extremely special thing between heaven and earth. Ordinary things couldn't be seen by the illusion breaker eyes. But how do I get it? Xiaohua closed his illusion breaker eyes, and his figure landed on the surface of the water. He scratched his chin in worry. Come, let this young master see your true appearance. Xiaohua waved his hand and took out 2 huge magic hammers. With a splash, he jumped into the water and stood in front of that thing. This pool of water is actually neither hot nor cold. Xiaohua had just come out from the cold stream and landed in the deep pool. He only thought about struggling to get out and didn't pay attention to it. Only now did he know that the water in this deep pool was actually exactly the same as ordinary water. Xiaohua's gaze swept over the source of the dozens of streams. Naturally, he understood that these streams should come from the 3rd layer. Half of them should be in the cold ice area, and the other half should be in the lava area. At this place, they converged again. That thing was about 1 qi below the surface of the pool. Xiaohua picked up the magic hammers, looked at the angle, and used all his strength to smash a protrusion on the rock wall. But as soon as the magic hammers fell into the water, the force was immediately offset by the pool water. Moreover, the pool water's buoyancy was quite strong. When the magic hammers hit the rock wall, it was no different from a light touch. Xiaohua tried a few more times under the water, but none of them were satisfactory. He couldn't help but frown. He could only put the magic hammers into the space and cast his gaze towards the deep pool. Thinking for a moment, Xiaohua's mind entered the space and activated the puppets. They dug a large hole in a certain place, and he himself looked at the thing in the rock wall. That thing looked no different from the rock wall. If Xiaohua hadn't obtained Master Lu Peng's jade slip, he definitely wouldn't have thought that there would be such a thing here. Xiaohua reached out and touched it. That thing was incomparably hard, and it felt as sharp as the rock wall. This is strange. I don't know what this thing is used for. Xiaohua stared at it for a long time, thinking of other methods. At this time, he could only use his divine sense. His true essence was completely condensed, so what other methods could he use? He could only use brute force. Moreover, if there were other methods to solve this problem, he feared that when Master Lu Peng came last time, he would have already taken this thing away. When the puppets in the space finished digging the large hole, Xiaohua's mind came out again. He placed his hand on the pool water, and his mind thought about taking the water in his hand into the space. Sure enough, a very interesting scene appeared. As the water in Xiaohua's hand was taken into the space, the water in the deep pool also flowed into his hand, and this water was slowly taken into the space by Xiaohua. At the beginning, Xiaohua was still a bit unfamiliar with this, and it was a bit intermittent. But after half a cup of tea's time, Xiaohua was already familiar with it. Just like a giant whale sucking in water, the water in the deep pool was completely absorbed into the space. Chapter 2026. Ha, Xiaohua laughed. His gaze fell on the bottom of the pool, but he saw that the bottom of the pool was still pitch-black rock walls. There were no obvious formations or restrictions, but the great power was still there. This is a natural forbidden area. The power of heaven and earth. Xiaohua sighed. At this moment, there was a buzzing sound. It seemed that at the same time, the amount of water in the dozens of holes increased by more than 10 times. Xiaohua didn't have time to dodge and was immediately drenched. Good, this pool of water is also strange. This young master should get back to work. Xiaohua looked at the pool of water. He didn't care about the stream water on his head and took out the magic hammer again. Peng peng peng, peng peng peng. In the entire space, Xiaohua was like a foolish old man chiseling a mountain. He stood on the protruding rock and hammered the incomparably hard black rock wall. After smoking half a cigarette, Xiaohua finally smashed a hole in the protrusion on the rock wall. Fortunately, although this rock wall is so hard, it can still be chiseled. If it was the rock wall just now, this young master would have no way to break it. Xiaohua rejoiced a little. He had also collected materials for refining in the first layer of the cave, so it didn't seem to be this troublesome. Therefore, Xiaohua was reluctant to throw away the rock, so he casually placed it in his space. A hole appeared. The thing that was flat with the rock wall just now, which he couldn't exert force on, now revealed a place where he could grab it with his hand. However, when Xiaohua reached out to grab that thing actually shrank on its own, as if it was going to be flat with the hole that Xiaohua made just now. Ah! Xiaohua had already stretched out his hand and retracted it. Could it be that this thing is alive? One side of that thing slowly shrank, while the other side didn't move. In a moment, it was flat with the entire rock wall, without any gap. Xiaohua looked at the other side of that thing. Sure enough, Xiaohua didn't move the other side of the rock wall. That thing was also stuck on that side of the rock wall and didn't move. This. Xiaohua seemed to think of something, but it was only a feeling. He didn't know what it was. However, he understood that it was definitely a good thing. Since it was a good thing, how could Xiaohua let it go? Without saying anything, Xiaohua raised his magic hammer and went all out. In the time it took to smoke a cigarette, under the hard work of God Power Xiaohua, he finally made another hole in the wall. This hole was about the same as the previous one, but it was clear that the effort he used was more than twice as much. At this time, Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He put away the devil hammer and immediately stretched out his hand to grab the thing that was about to shrink. Why is it so slippery? Wasn't it hard just now? Xiaohua felt a wave of slipperiness when he touched it. If it wasn't for the lack of heat, Xiaohua would have suspected that he had grabbed onto something that he shouldn't have. However, he didn't dare to hesitate. He used his fingers to hold onto that thing tightly while his other hand pushed against the rock wall. He exerted all the strength in his body with one arm and shouted, "Come out for me!" But contrary to Xiaohua's expectations, just as his voice came out, the slippery thing in his hand suddenly disappeared, as if it had suddenly disappeared. At this time, his strength had just been exerted, and his body suddenly fell backwards. Seeing that Xiaohua had lost control of his strength, he hurriedly twisted his body and curled his body up. He quickly somersaulted a few times in the air, and with a poochie sound, he landed on the layer of water that had just gathered. Damn it, what is this? Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He raised his head to look at the thing on the high rock wall and was somewhat at a loss. He was currently at the bottom of the pool. The original wall of the pool beside him was a little concave, but it was really too small, no different from a steep mountain. Xiaohua's hands and feet were clumsy. He couldn't even use ethereal steps, so how could he go up? Wait! Xiaohua was helpless. He could only sit at the bottom of the pool and anxiously watch the water flowing out from the dozens of holes in the pool. He waited for the pool water to slowly float up to the big rock that Xiaohua was standing on earlier. With the previous two experiences, Xiaohua once again found a direction to smash. This time, he used the time of 2 cigarettes to smash down a piece of the rock wall. After collecting the rock wall, Xiaohua immediately took out the Great Wisdom Sword. Gathering his strength, he used the tip of the sword, which had yet to be unsealed, to stab into that object. Sure enough, everything has its nemesis. Xiaohua saw that the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword had indeed inserted into that thing and laughed heartily. He used his strength to pull the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword, and bit by bit, he pulled that thing out from the rock wall. Just how strong was Xiaohua's arms right now? Perhaps no one in the entire cultivation world could compare to him. But even with this kind of astonishing strength, he was only able to drag that thing out of the rock wall with great difficulty, bit by bit. And Xiaohua also slowly retreated to the shore as that thing was pulled out. Seeing that he was about to pull out the thing that was about 1 zhang long, Xiaohua panted and his face revealed a happy expression. It was also at this moment that Xiaohua suddenly became the same as before. His hands became light and he lost his balance. He had no choice but to spin a few times in the air to dissipate the force and land on the ground to stabilize his body. When he saw that the thing that was about 1 zhang long had disappeared, he was somewhat discouraged. He didn't look carefully and lowered his head to walk towards the pool water again. But when his gaze fell on the rock wall that was not covered by the pool water, he was stunned. That rock wall had become an empty hole, completely different from the one that was tightly sealed just now. Could it be that I pulled that thing out? Xiaohua suddenly understood and immediately turned the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword to look. Sure enough, at the tip of the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword, there was a fist-sized thing inserted. That thing was the same color as the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword. If one didn't look carefully, how could they see it clearly? Xiaohua looked at the thing in front of him and then looked at the rock wall. There was already an empty hole there. Xiaohua even used his transcendence vision to look at it. It was also empty inside. There was nothing else. That thing that was about 1 zhang long and 1 qi wide, and it was a spindle, it became such a big piece? Xiaohua was somewhat flabbergasted. He even evilly clenched his hand a few times and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What can this thing do? That's right, the thing in his hand was only so big, it actually didn't have any strength. It didn't have any weight at all. What can it do? Xiaohua himself didn't know how to explain it. Forget it. It wasn't easy to get this thing, I must keep it well. Who knows what use it has? Xiaohua waved his hand and put the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword and that thing into the space. After he was in the space, he used his mind to forcibly remove that thing from the Great Wisdom Heavy Sword. Only then did Xiaohua mutter to himself, if it doesn't work, then I'll give it to Fairy Hongxia. Her lines seem to be a bit worse than Xue Xue's. Oh, that's right, this rock wall is really solid. Now that there's a hole, it should be easy to break. Xiaohua really didn't leave empty-handed. He ruthlessly smashed a few more pieces of the rock wall. Only then did he stop. He clapped his hands as if he hadn't had enough and returned to the shore. At this time, the water in the pool was rising very quickly. It had already reached the hole in the rock wall and was still rising. Walala, the entire space was filled with the sound of water. The water in the pool overflowed the deep pool. The water in the pool overflowed the rock wall and continued to rise. This is bad. Seeing that the water in the pool had surpassed the original position of the pool and continued to rise to his feet, Xiaohua was slightly startled. He knew that by taking away the water in the pool, he had triggered another restriction. He hastily looked left and right and moved towards the high slope that he had just found the way out. When Xiaohua reached the high slope, he looked at the stream that was like a water dragon spitting out water. Xiaohua came to a realization. Great, as long as the water in the pool rises to the same height as the stream, this young master will be able to swim over soon? And then go out from the place that I came in from? Just like that. Thus, Xiaohua's eyes stared straight at the distant pool of water. He calmly waited for the pool of water to not reach the rock wall before he swam over. What Xiaohua didn't expect was that when he was staring at the front with all his attention, the pool of water quietly didn't reach the high slope. When it reached a certain height, the rock wall behind Xiaohua gradually emitted a faint brilliance. A 10-feet square hole appeared behind him. And in that hole stood a cultivator. Huh? Why isn't it rising anymore? Xiaohua suddenly felt that something was wrong. A gust of cold wind suddenly appeared behind him. Ah? Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. He used his divine sense to sweep behind him. Seeing the abnormality, he hastily threw himself to the left. At the same time, he took out the Great Wisdom Sword in his hand and swept it behind him. With a pu sound, the Great Wisdom Sword hit that cultivator's body. That cultivator's body was immediately sent flying. He crashed into the rock wall at the side of the cave and fell down. There wasn't the slightest sound of a scream. This person died long ago? Xiaohua's divine sense swept again. He already knew. And at this time, The stream above the pool of water returned to its original state. The pool of water also began to slowly recede. Looking at the flickering brilliance of the cave entrance, Xiaohua knew that the cave entrance was about to close again. Without thinking, he hurriedly took a big stride and jumped into the cave entrance. After a few breaths, the cave entrance disappeared. A pitch-black rock wall blocked the entrance of the cave. "Oh, I understand now." Xiaohua slightly nodded. There were probably some rules for entering and exiting this layer. As long as one grasped the rules, they would be able to enter and exit freely. Otherwise, Reverend Brightsword wouldn't have not written down the method of entering and exiting in the jade slip. This guy. I'm afraid he died here long ago? He didn't even have a storage bag on him. He must have been ambushed by the cultivators who came with him. Sigh, what can I do? Humans die for wealth and birds die for food. So what if he was a cultivator? Isn't it the same? Xiaohua's divine sense swept over the cultivator's corpse. He slightly shook his head. Reaching out with his hand, he took out the tip of the devil's spear. Releasing his divine sense, he carefully took precautions and walked out of the cave. Xiaohua knew that the exit method given by Reverend Brightsword might not be the same as the one Zhu Qinghe used to enter. He also wasn't afraid of running into them again. Chapter 2027. The Haoming City was known as one of the 7 major cities of the country of Xi, and it was not an undeserved reputation. A mountain range that was several hundred feet high was towering under the clear sky. The mountain range stretched for more than 10 miles. There were many cultivators riding on clouds above the mountain range, going up and down from time to time. Among them, there were also immortal birds that spread their wings and circled around the mountain range. Some of them had people on their backs, while some didn't. If one looked carefully, they would see that there were some palaces, pavilions, and simple caves where the cultivators went in and out of the mountain range. They were quite different from ordinary immortal caves. If one were to observe carefully, they would be able to see that although there were many cultivators flying above the mountain range, the higher they flew, the fewer there were. At the bottom of the mountain range, there were the largest number of cultivators, and they had the widest range of activity. They were qi condensation cultivators. The mountain range was covered with dark green vegetation. The vegetation was not the same, and each had its own unique characteristics. Every place had its own beauty. However, there was a faint light flickering under the vegetation, and there were even faint runes flowing. A single rune didn't look special, but if the runes on the entire mountain range were connected, the mountain range's aura would immediately be aggressive. Looking at the bottom of the mountain range, there was a strip of open space that was several miles wide, enclosing the entire mountain range. There were many buildings on the open space, and there were many secular people. These people were bustling with activity, and it was very lively. This was the entire Haoming City. The people on the ground were the secular people of Haoming City, and the cultivators on the mountain range were the cultivators of Haoming City. It really lives up to its reputation. At this moment, Xiaohua flew over from midair and saw the majestic aura of Haoming City from afar. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Xiaohua came out of the ink shadow black forest and didn't rest much. He found the nearest teleportation formation and went directly to Haoming City. However, when he reached the last teleportation formation, there was a problem. Because Haoming City was going to hold an auction in the next few days, and there were too many cultivators going to Haoming City, Taoist Master Quan Hong of Haoming City issued an order that the teleportation formation would only accept cultivators above the gold core stage. Foundation establishment cultivators and qi refining cultivators could only rely on themselves to fly over. Therefore, Xiaohua had no choice but to ask for directions and fly over himself. However, this was also good. Xiaohua had obtained Immortal Brightsword's Sword Heart Energy Seed technique in the Majiao Black Forest, but he had never carefully comprehended it. Now that he was comprehending it while flying, by the time he saw Haoming City, he had already comprehended most of its essence. However, Xiaohua valued this Sword Heart Origin Seed art. It was far from being used on a flying sword. Therefore, he had no choice but to be extremely cautious. He was afraid that there would be a problem if he took it out to comprehend. At the same time, he also took out the Ghost Cultivator's spirit-splitting art, Li Xiaobai's primordial spirit-strengthening art, and the Blood Shadow art. He scrutinized them one by one. Forget it. It seems like Haoming City is already near, but if I were to fly closer, wouldn't I still need a day's worth of effort if I were to use an ordinary flying technique? Xiaohua released his divine sense like a waterfall. He looked to his left, found a hidden place, and landed. This place was already very close to Haoming City. The spiritual qi of heaven and earth was abundant, and the scenery was beautiful. It was 100 times better than the left side of the Majiao Black Forest. Xiaohua released the puppets and easily opened up a simple cave on a stone wall near the water. After that, he set up the rabbit array formation and sat down cross-legged. He opened his mouth and Zhu Meng flew out. When the dream execution sword landed in his hand, the sword light shrank and contracted slightly, appearing extremely agile. Xiaohua smiled and muttered to himself, "This sword pill is actually Senior Li Xiaobai's 9 stars transverse sun sword pill. There is also the sword intent sealed by Senior inside. This is something that sword cultivators yearn for. If I were to go around looking for sword cultivation techniques, wouldn't I be guarding a treasure mountain and begging for food? Moreover, with Immortal Bright Sword Heart Energy Seed Art, I can plant a trace of my primordial spirit in the other 8 sword pills and let them slowly germinate and grow. Presumably, it won't be long before I can use the 9 stars transverse sun sword art and even sword playing the world, right?" However, Senior Bright Sword has been immersed in Sword Dao since he was a child. Although this secret technique of his is different, he still has a very deep background as a sword cultivator. It might not be difficult for a sword cultivator, but for me, it will be a bit of a challenge. Xiaohua thought for a moment, then closed his eyes and read the Sword Heart Energy Seed art again. Then he waved the flying sword and it floated in front of him. Xiaohua's hands then formed an extremely strange seal, and he tapped the space between his eyebrows. The magic power in his body gradually surged toward the seal in his hands, and his divine sense also contracted. In less than the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, pain appeared on Xiaohua's face, and bean-sized drops of sweat formed on his forehead. An unparalleled pain, a sharp pain that felt like it was tearing him apart, and a feeling that life was worse than death arose in Xiaohua's head. There was a rumbling sound, and the space in Xiaohua's mind shook like an earthquake. Little Silver and the other spirit beasts looked in horror at the starry sky that had suddenly changed. Little Yellow, Thunder Beast, and the others, who were sleeping soundly, also opened their eyes slightly and looked very sleepily. "Quick!" Xiaohua uttered an incantation, and his hands trembled as he formed a seal. As the incantation entered his body, Xiaohua felt his mind go blank and his head sway. It was as if the entire world had become 2 overlapping worlds. He knew in his heart that the initial primordial spirit split had been successful, and a wisp of primordial spirit had been torn from the complete primordial spirit. Resisting the extreme discomfort, Xiaohua hurriedly used a secret technique to send that wisp of primordial spirit into Executioner Dream. Just as that wisp of primordial spirit entered Executioner Dream, a sword light as brilliant as a shooting star came from the distance and flew toward Xiaohua's primordial spirit. That suffocating flowing light gave people a feeling that they couldn't escape, a feeling that made people want to be torn apart. Xiaohua knew that this was Executioner Dream's sword intent, and didn't dare be careless. He urged his primordial spirit to fly toward the sword intent, like a moth flying into a flame. With a boom, Xiaohua only felt his vision darken as that wisp of primordial spirit became entangled with the sword intent. Xiaohua hurriedly continued to use the elemental planting technique to fuse his primordial spirit and the sword intent tightly together. Like a sweet rain, the sword intent slowly flowed within Xiaohua's primordial spirit, gradually nourishing Xiaohua's injured primordial spirit. After an unknown period of time, the primordial spirit within the sword intent seemed to have fallen asleep, and there was no more movement. Great! Xiaohua sighed. He knew that the sword heart elemental planting technique was basically a success. He only needed to wait for that wisp of primordial spirit in the sword intent to gradually grow stronger under the sword cultivator's secret technique, and then he would be able to use his primordial spirit to control the sword. This method was indeed effective, but the pain was really too great. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.